From the President's office in the White House in Washington, D.C., we present an address by the President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower.
In holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
Monday, June 8th, 2020. Thank you for joining me today. Quite a bit to go over as usual, but there's an interesting spin on things today I definitely picked up on. I feel like we can see the transition taking place today. As we, at least those that have somewhat agreed with my assessment of how this has gone, we see that they didn't work, that people are not buying it in regard to COVID-19 and the reality of how severe it was or whether it was there at all. And people are simply not buying it. And now their own data is backing that up. So they needed something else. They decided to use or create something else, which is where we are now. So now they're hyping people up about something else, but it's just absolute coincidence that everything that they were trying to force in before, it just so happens to work for riots too. What do you know? It's just one of those things. But we're now seeing that we're in this position where they're trying to force these things in. And I think people are still not buying it. In fact, they're trying to frame this as something again, as always, on either side of the false party paradigm, it's they're all rioters or all peaceful. And it's neither of those things. But I think no one bought that. And we're now seeing massive protests that you can't just deny are simply protests that are still happening. And I argue it's not just about Floyd. I argue it's about a hell of a lot more. That was simply the spark that lit the fire. And people are tired, marching through the streets all around the world, demanding change. This is what we need to be doing. This is what everyone needs to be doing. As you guys probably know, coming up here on the 13th, we have the Expose Bill Gates Day of, truth, fighting for the reality. And we're going to talk about that in the beginning, just really quickly to show you a video that we just put out. But overall today, we're going to be going over this transition and how it seems, just like we told you, by the way, they're now saying, look, it wasn't bad because we did our job. That's the only reason. See, we were telling you the truth, but because you listened to us, even though we really didn't, everything worked out for you. And now we're going to show you as well that we have even more information that shows that they knew either they needed to make something happen or they knew they were going to make this happen. Definitively, I'll show you that today, as well as the fact that we now see again another plan, another preparation event. What are we calling Event 201? Right, another exercise. That's what it was. Another exercise, if you will. But in regard to finances, in regard to BlackRock, that overtly Israeli government-tied company that's now in control of the Fed in this country. Awesome stuff. Well, guess what? It turns out they made a plan in regard to the bailout, that thing that's it's a bailout plan, but in regard to the financial crisis, apparently before it happened, even though the reality is it was happening long before that. This is the illusion. But you see, they weren't supposed to be making a plan for an economic crisis that didn't exist because Trump said we were doing great and this is the best we've ever been. Yet BlackRock was making a plan about this crisis in August. So either they knew this was going to happen or they already had a problem and they created something to cover that problem. We're going to get into all this today and show you it's just coming out left and right. And anyone that's actually still paying attention can see this stuff as if it's written right on the back of your hand. Like it's the first thing that you're going to see. If you're in the two-party paradigm, of course, well, you're going to ignore it because it challenges one part or the other of something you're not supposed to be looking at. We're going to talk about other things as well, something Derek Bros covered in a video today in regard to a new study coming out, another one suggesting that this thing was not organic, man-made, at the very least manipulated. And then it's being immediately censored and shut down. Why? Because, well, the community said that's not true. Who cares about the data and the evidence? The scientific community that we've already seen wrong over and over. They stood up and said, no, you have to delete that. And so they did. We'll talk about that and a lot of foreign policy things that are happening right now that would probably just blow your mind. Not because you wouldn't expect the government to do it, but because they're doing it now. A lot of things, actually. But let's start off today with a couple of quick things I want to share with you all so you can see them. And this is the video I was talking about. I put this out today from the show I did with Derek recently when we announced the Expose Bill Gates Day of Action. Join the Expose Bill Gates Day of Action. The time to stand against this technocratic tyranny is now. Please share the video. Please share the flyer that Derek made for everyone to be able to share around and join us in this day of action. At the very least, a day of awareness to stand up and make people aware that we're not taking what they're giving us. Or rather, make the government aware and let people be aware that that is something that they can take part in. As he said, you can change your profile picture to this, put the flyers out, make your own things. It's everywhere. It's on you to take this day and raise awareness about all the things that we know, not the things we think. This isn't some half-hearted, decades ago conspiracy theory, as they framed it anyway, that's just completely half-hearted with nothing really to it. They're just grasping at straws, sort of how everything the mainstream media has done since has been, Russiagate and everything else. But no, this is legitimate. This is based on absolute verifiable data of what he's connected to, the things that he's done, and the things he's openly trying to accomplish, and that we are not going to allow. That's what it's about. So please join us in this on June 13th. It's coming soon. Now, I also wanted to put a quick shout out to Robert Inlakesh, who reached out today. He has a great documentary, just put out the first part of it anyway. Steal of the Century, Trump's Palestine-Israel Catastrophe. Robert, always doing a great job. I'm hoping to get him on when he's done with this so we can talk about his documentary. But I haven't got a chance to watch it in its entirety. I watched about half of it this morning before, but I wanted to let you guys know it's there so you can watch it. Very important stuff. Because we're a couple foreign policy points to end today. This is stuff that no one's paying attention to, and it's still happening. In fact, there are massive protests against the illegal annexation in Israel. Gee, I wonder why the mainstream media won't show you that. Another great video from Kip Simpson, by the way. I haven't mentioned him in a while, but he's always doing great work. Justice Department demands UK handover Prince Andrew to the FBI for questioning. Now, I'm not going to go into this today, or this one, for that matter. Senate Republicans approve subpoenas for ex-Obama officials, because I am not falling for the bait again until we see something happen. I'm tired of saying, yay, they're calling in Hillary Clinton for the 40th time, the 15th time to go in and testify, and then nothing happens. Sort of like when we did a whole show about those people, the lawyers, or actually the people involved with their foundation that openly testified on the record about all the criminal activity. That they ran this foundation like their own personal piggy bank. That was a direct quote from the trial. Guess what happened? Absolutely nothing. Because, Trump's going to put her in jail, lock her up, right? That was one of the promises. He had everything he needed right there. Nothing happened. That's the reality. But the point is, these things, see, someone says, add some of these into your description. The guys, I don't know why this is such a difficult issue for people. Look at the description right now for those that are always curious about the links. You'll see something at the bottom that says all of the links are posted on this link, which goes to the website. When I'm done with this show, I will update that link to go to the page where all the links are. Every single time. And the only reason that all happens is because YouTube is censoring. So don't blame me for the issue of having to go to another site. YouTube is censoring based on links you put in your show notes. So that's just the way it is. So guys, it's always there. For those that are new, I will always provide the links to every single thing that I show on this show, that I display on this show. Just so you guys know, the frustration's not with you that made the comment. It's the fact that it's always been there. It's written right there in the description, and it just keep getting comments. And I get it, it's changed. And that's, by the way, this is exactly what they want. They want the confusion. They want the issue. They don't want people to go, oh, screw it, I'm just going to go over here. Same thing with the website. Since I'm talking about it, the reality is the website is good. It's up and running. It's fine. The problem was, because of what we had to do to get past the overt attacks that were happening, was a change, which now the DNS has to update, which takes a moment. So if you refresh your cache out there, hopefully it'll happen for you instantaneously. Otherwise, probably tomorrow it'll be fine. The problem is, that sucks. It sucks for everyone. It sucks for me. It's problematic for you. You want to see the content. That's exactly what they hope for. Even when we succeed in fighting them off, we still go through problems like this. Okay, this is the problem when you're fighting for the truth. When you're fighting for the things that the government don't want you talking about. They're powerful. They can do what they want. The only thing we need to do is just not give up, guys. Don't give up. Don't get frustrated and say, screw it, I'm just going to go to this channel because this is down. Just tough it out. Show them that you won't let them win the game, right? Just keep going. And that doesn't mean, by the way, that you have to go to The Last American Vagabond. The point is just continue to look for independent sources about the content. I mean, right off the bat, I can tell you that Activist Post tends to republish a lot of our content lately in regard to specifically Derek and Whitney's articles and sometimes my videos. So half the time you'll see them there anyway. So just find them, right? Don't let them win. Now, these things that I'm talking about, guys, will be in the show notes, like everything, every single time. But the point is this idea about Prince Andrew, and this one's saying that he claims he cooperated with the FBI, and they're saying, we're demanding that you come and for questioning, which you haven't done. So they're basically calling each other liars. One's saying he said he did it. They're saying you didn't. Tim, you know what this seems like to me? They're all guilty, and each of them are trying to point the finger, right? This is trying to blame it on the UK. It's not the US, right? This has been one of the primary mandates of the Trump administration to point the finger at anybody but you for anything that might come your way. This is the sidestepping administration more than I've ever seen in my lifetime. Anything, even the most blatantly obvious things they're tied to. It's like, well, yeah, it wasn't me. Trump acts like I have no idea what's going on. You're the president, man. Own it. But the bottom line, these things, I don't think these are going anywhere. I really don't. I think this is an illusion. I think this is meant to distract people. I don't think anything's actually going to happen. At the very least, if they are trying to go after each other, it's just going to be a standoff. But the bottom line is they want you to be pointing the finger at anybody else, back and forth. But I'm not going to cover these until we find out what's actually going on. Even when we have Obama people testifying, I might point it out. I might reference important things that were said, but I'm really tired of continuing to be like, yes, it might happen, and then obviously not happening. It's frustrating. So when we see action, people being charged with crimes, you'll hear me talk about it. Because remember, guys, we have seen this over and over and over in both directions, and it never comes to pass. Now, let's get into the main points of today. The bulk, the important stuff. To start off, something I swear you knew was coming, something I told you was going to happen, and here we are. It is almost, it's insulting, as always, to your intelligence for something this stupid. But you would expect this to be like On the Onion, like a parody. It's almost as ridiculous as the jobs numbers and all the things coming out, even though every single year we find out that they've manipulated this or changed that or said, oh, well, they've all been unemployed for 6 months, so let's just knock them off the edge because there's a different category there, even though everyone's been unemployed that long, and they probably just tweaked the numbers and said, oh, look, they're all there. We made jobs when everything was shut down. Totally makes sense. But these things are happening. Like parody level manipulations. Coronavirus shutdown prevented 60 million infections in the United States, study says. 60 million. Do you realize? So what are they arguing? That we would have had what is it right now? I could just look really quickly at what the updated numbers are, at least so we're told anyway. So look, according to the official data, there's only 7 million, a little over 7 million cases total. But apparently, this is the world, guys. But according to a study in the US government, they want you to believe that if they hadn't done the basically non-existent, ineffectual things that they actually did, as much as Trump will scream about how they saved the world, they didn't really do much at all. But those things that they did do, they're claiming if they didn't do those things, that they would have allowed 60 million cases. 60 million. So more than 6 times the amount the entire world has dealt with if they just hadn't done the little things that they did. I just don't, I want to get the person who did this study right in front of me and just go through the points and watch them squirm, because you will know that they are just pulling stuff out of nowhere. You know what I can promise you they did? 60 million is probably based on a previous pandemic, based on something that wasn't treated, and they just go, well, that makes sense, so that's what would have happened. That is about as flimsy as it gets, and that's what they constantly do. That is why these numbers are constantly wrong, such as the numbers that they championed that were in part from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that both were shown to be completely wildly incorrect, but yet they were used to create all of the things that they did against us under the guise they were protecting us. But they really want you to believe that they prevented 60 million. Remember, guys, the only things we talked about, the US government put a partial ban on flights from China, not allowing Chinese nationals, but still allowing anybody else that wasn't Chinese. Let's make it clear and say Americans that were in China were still allowed to come back. So explain for me how that makes any sense. I'm not saying they should have left them there, but the reality that you're saying that there's a problem there. By the way, this is at a time when they apparently did this because there was a problem, but yet then they pretended they didn't know until China said something later, because that totally lines up. But they shut down the border for only Chinese nationals and allowed anybody else that were there, Americans-wise, to come back. So they still brought whatever was back with them. Totally makes sense. That is about the gist of ultimately what happened. Every other action was pretty much ineffectual. Things they did here, Defense Production Acts, mandating things to be built that ultimately killed 96% of the people that use them, such as ventilators, even though we're still doing that now in Africa because it totally lines up. I mean, on and on and on. They are forcing in all the same things that they've already done, even though we know that this stuff is incorrect. Now, check this out. Based on that exact point, because they're saying, oh, well, we keep saying the CDC said, well, guess what? Oh, we're going to fact check that. CDC's estimates COVID-19 death rate around 0.26%. This is right on the USA Today website. Doesn't confirm it, they say. Oh, debunked, right? So you tell me, at what point in this entire stage have we gotten anything that was confirmed? Spoiler alert, never. So every single thing we've gotten to so far, and remember, I said this in the beginning, that the numbers that they're putting forward are estimates. So even when they said 3.4%, that was an estimate based on their best guess. But now, because the estimate is not what they like, now they go, well, you can't believe it because it's just an estimate. Isn't that funny how it works when they want it to, but not the other way around? And it's funny that they even said fact check. Remember, based on their estimates, they shut down this country. Based on their estimates, they destroyed your business. Based on their estimates, they made you lose your job. And now, because the estimates are becoming more realistic, they're going, well, don't listen to it because it's just an estimate. So they're willing to destroy your life based on their estimate that they like, but not willing to give it back to you based on the reality that they don't like. Isn't that just fantastic? I mean, this actually floored me. I say, how in the world are people buying this? Now, and guys, realize that is still accurate, though. It is an estimate. And the argument they're making is that, well, based on, I think what they say, that when including, that basically, funny enough, the exact same thing that we were saying in the beginning. Well, if you tested everybody, it would make it go down. But now they're saying the same thing in the other way. Well, if we tested everybody, it's going to be a little bit more severe. It's just so embarrassing that remember when they told us we were crazy for saying that exact same rationale? Well, now they're telling it to us. But the problem is they're saying that it will be more. Okay, fine. So let's say you do this and you add up all the rest of the tests. How much do you really think it's going to jump? You're telling me that their estimate based on the current data, and that's a lot more than there was before, and they trusted those numbers. Now there's more data, and they think it's 2.26%. And let's say they flesh out the rest of it and finish the testing. Are we going to pretend that's going to jump 3%? I mean, it's ridiculous. It maybe will jump a couple points, and we're still dramatically lower than the flu. But here we are, as they continue to push it in. I mean, really think about what's happening. And remember, it's coming from both sides. Donald Trump just said he's going to ask for more stimulus money. So he's going to take more money from you and then tell you it's going to go back to you, which doesn't even make sense, but then give it to bigger business, just like the last two times we saw. It's happening right now. And we're actually going to get into a big part of that in the next part of this in regard to BlackRock, the overtly Israeli government-tied company that's in control of our Fed in this country. Totally makes sense. A lot of it does today, right? But on top of that, we're talking about vaccines, remember? Can't open the country until we get vaccines, but why do we need one if it's less than the flu, right? Because they don't force the flu vaccine to open the country when it happens. And the last year was one of the worst we've ever seen. But remember, that's probably because we had this going around and they're just hiding that now. But it still was not as severe as the flu. So bottom line, based on our logic, every single year until now, we shouldn't need anything to do anything. It's your choice, like an actual free country, like they pretend we are. But no. Fact check. It's not confirmed yet. So now we just have to wait. Doesn't that work out nicely? Here's another part that I know you're going to love. And we talked about this back when this happened. I remember this now. This is crazy to me. Now, this was shared from Orwell Huxley. Thank you for sharing this with me. And this was recent. And remember when we first talked about this? Remember when this was a story briefly, momentarily, where the UK government basically said, well, it's not as severe. And then that just got ignored and we just went forward. And even the UK kept doing things. They kept cracking down and arresting people and putting people on quarantine, even though they said it, right? Now, first of all, I saw this and was like, okay, I remember this. We talked about it, but let's just follow up, make sure. And just so you guys know, this is the exact website. This is the exact thing. from the UK gov.uk website. This is 100% legitimate. Now you can see very clearly let's just look at the image here so I can zoom in for you. High consequence infectious diseases, right? And it goes over all these. Now, the point, and this just, I mean, for those that haven't seen this, this is just going to have to blow your mind. It says, as of March 19th, COVID-19 is no longer considered to be a high consequence infectious disease, meaning something we should be concerned about, right? Like an Ebola, like anything else that other things that they've manufactured, right? But other things that are more, infectious. That's what this is about. So explain for me. Now, again, just so we're clear, here's the actual document on the website, the gov.uk, and it says it right there. So how in the world, in March, when this is supposed to be at its peak, is the UK government putting on their own website that this thing that they had since used to crack down on people was no longer a high consequence infectious disease? Okay, this was last updated March 21st. Okay, so I mean this is current. Otherwise, it wouldn't say this right now. This is the direct website. And you can go into the main one as well. Let me see. I mean, look, the point is you guys can look at these for yourself. So you guys can just see the whole picture here. And it says right here, the whole point, available, more information is available at mortality rates, low overall. Okay? That is what we need to be able to think about. The idea that this is not what they're telling us it is. And they're willing to say this on March 19th, but yet continue to do all these things. To this point, right now. And yet the U.S. government right now is even saying that, well, lucky for you, we did these really small things that actually saved, that saved 60 million people from getting sick. That's what they're saying, as the UK in March said, well, it's just not even that dangerous at all. I mean, I would really love to hear what people have to say about that. And again, I remember pointing this out then. But how can we talk about it like it's not severe and yet then still simultaneously pretend that they're forcing things in? Or that we justifiably are forcing things in. And I think the point is, guys, that we're very, very, very clearly seeing the agenda, the outlines. Now, whether that means that they lied about it all and it's completely fabricated, or they released something and used it, or it happened however and they used it anyway. The point is that this was something that was being prepared for. And this needs to open some eyes here. From Wall Street on Parade, BlackRock authored the bailout plan before there was a crisis. Now it's been hired by 3 central banks to implement the plan. So just be very clear. BlackRock, the company that is essentially, and you remember how this started, right? This is because of where we were. Again, because of the actions our government took based on fake information, or rather false information, however you want to look at it, that allowed a very clearly, overtly Israeli government-tied, and this is a huge company, by the way. I think they manage something like $7 trillion in assets. We allowed this company to essentially take control of the Treasury, of the Fed, of the U.S. Treasury, right? So that gives them some pretty incredible power. And you'll see why as we go through these next points. But realize that was created because of the actions taken by our government, and then realize that this was a plan that they had created before this ever started. So only 2 things could be happening here. One, that they have this clear economic issue, by the way, which we've all been pointing to, right? Anybody out there that's been blindly listening to Donald Trump are going to be like, you're crazy. It's been the greatest year for this country of all time. But that's not true. The data is very clear. We have had an economic crisis, an impending crisis, that's been building ever since 2008. You know why? Because they never changed a damn thing. In fact, they did every single thing that led to 2008 times 10. And that's an actual statistic. They went through every single marker that they believed that led to what happened, and then showed, and I think this was like a couple years ago, that at that moment, the U.S. government was doing every single one of them way worse than they were before 2008. Why would that be? Because either they don't care. Well, they don't care. That's what it is. They don't care because we took the brunt last time. They took all your money, they paid the banks back, they gave themselves some bonuses, and they all went forward. And we got screwed. And now it's happening again. And it already did happen. They already happened again. They already stole your money, bailed out the banks, bailed out the companies that were struggling, put this company in control. And they said, well, it's because of the crisis when they put them in control, except that they wrote the plan for the crisis before it ever started. BlackRock. And don't forget, guys, when we're talking about overtly Israeli government-tied companies, we also know that they've created our voting machines, a company that's directly tied to Unit 8200 of Israel. They're basically their NSA. So our voting machines are built by a government that has overtly manipulated in our country over and over and over, such as right now, as we already talked about, as it's been proven that Netanyahu directly tried to meddle in the election in 2016 and very clearly did, overtly saying that we need to make sure he wins. That's on record now. That's what they're doing. Oh, and guess what? They're also making the voting machine software. Two separate things, both being tied back to the Israeli government companies, because that makes you feel safe, right? Carbine 911 is a bigger one in regard to dispatch centers. That there's going to see some more content coming about that soon. And now, just complete control of the Fed. It's called Going Direct. That's the financial bailout plan designed and authored by former central bankers now on the payroll at BlackRock. It says an investment manager of $7 trillion in stocks and bond funds. The plan was rolled out in August 2019. Now, this shouldn't be that shocking because remember, if you're actually paying attention and we're listening to anybody outside of the Republican political circle, the writing was on the wall. We all saw the economic crisis. It was just a matter of when it happened. People have been saying that for 5 years. Just because we tweak a couple of numbers and fake some information and scream about how jobs are, unemployment's down and we're succeeding more than ever and just keep saying those things, people buy them. But Obama did the same thing and Bush did the same thing and people still bought it because people believe in their party line because that's how they trick you. That's what we need to stop doing. But they rolled out this plan. I'm arguing because there was a crisis, they knew they needed to do something. The question you need to ask yourself is why then did they not talk about it then? And why did they then wait for something that crashed it completely and simultaneously took the blame away from them and pointed to some nebulous thing floating through the air and then brought in BlackRock and then pretended like that plan, which they haven't even talked about, is now being used only because of coronavirus. Sort of how every other thing they've done has been just the same way. Oh, this AI plan that we had in 2010, that's going to be used for coronavirus. Oh, guess what? This vaccine plan everything, all of them are connecting in the middle around this obvious deception. We need to see that. I mean, look, guys, if anyone's out there actually looking for some kind of a coup or a way that some kind of foreign influence and overtaking our country, you're staring right at it. That's what's so ridiculous about this. People screaming about Russiagate and all this when there's basically nothing. That doesn't mean that I don't believe Russia's not trying to influence or trying to meddle. I think all of these governments are. But if you really want to see an actual coup, an actual overtaking a country, it's happening right in front of you. This government, the Israeli government, has influence at the very least over our entire treasury. They have influence, and I would argue complete control over our voting machines, our voting software. I mean, even 911 call centers through Carbine 911. It's ridiculous. And then you want to talk about giving money, $3.8 billion in the next year, even though 40 million Americans are unemployed. That's going to be $38 billion over the next 10 years. That went through the Senate already. Why didn't you know about that? Because they don't care to tell you. All they want you doing is getting emotionally outraged about the newest thing they have on TV. Well, they take your money and give it to whoever they want to all the time and tell you it's for you. They rolled this out at the G7 summit of central bankers in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, months before the public was aware of any financial crisis. Isn't that crazy? So you could even argue that they created the actual crisis that, the moment that put it over the edge. But I mean, I guess I would argue that was the quote unquote coronavirus event. But again, I mean, I guess I'm speaking about the same exact thing. Now, it says 1 month later, on September 17, 2019, the U.S. Federal Reserve would begin an emergency repo loan bailout program. Remember that? Right? Your own government didn't tell you that was the plan of a Israeli government-tied company that was taking over our treasury in about 6 months, right? They didn't tell you all that. They just said, this is something we're doing. And this was what it was from. It was because of these people influencing the direction of our country and your tax dollars, making hundreds of billions of dollars a week in loans by, quote, going direct to the trading houses on Wall Street. Now, the BlackRock plan calls for blurring the lines between government fiscal policy and guess what? Central bank monetary policy. Gee, big surprise. Sort of exact. I mean, again, it's almost like, it's weird. I keep hearing this analogy and it's about, that we are the ones, and I keep saying this, that we are the ones under U.S. sanctions right now, right? That we are the ones being regime changed. However you want to look at it, that we are the ones being, and I don't think that's talking about Donald Trump versus the deep state. I think that is some kind, that is just simply not there. And that doesn't mean there's not a deep state or there's not some battle going on. It's just not between Trump and the deep state. That's my opinion. But this is exactly what we keep seeing in other countries. What do you think they're trying to do in Venezuela, right? I mean, they want this to happen. They want a government blend with their monetary policy. So it's fascism. They want to control it and they want to give it to their elitists at the top. Whereas the other side, they want to use it to, enrich the people. The very thing that the government of the U.S. says they're doing and exactly doing the opposite. And the same thing in reverse for every other one they're trying to attack. That doesn't mean there's not corruption in these countries. But you can very clearly prove before all this that they had free education, free health care, zero to low interest loans, right? Tell what a terrible place, right? But of course they're starving. Oh, look how bad it is. Well, guess what? That's because of U.S. sanctions. Funny how it goes in circles. But right now, as they said, their plan was to blur the line between government fiscal policy and central bank monetary policy, basically doing exactly to us what this government has always been doing to other countries, exactly what the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve are doing today in the United States. Why? Because they're living out this plan created by a company completely tied to a foreign government. BlackRock has now been hired by the Federal Reserve and the Bank of Canada and Sweden's central bank to implement key features of this plan. The plan, again, that they created for this before it all started. 3 of the authors of the BlackRock plan previously worked as central bankers in the U.S., Canada, and Switzerland, respectively. Now, the authors wrote in the white paper that, in a downturn, the only solution is for more formal and historical unusual coordination of monetary and fiscal policy to provide effective stimulus. Now, it says we now understand why, for the first time in history, the U.S. Congress handed over $454 billion of taxpayer money to the Fed without any meaningful debate to eat losses on toxic assets produced by the Wall Street banks it supervises. The Fed plans to leverage the $454 billion into a $4.54 trillion bailout plan. Quote, going direct, with bailouts to the commercial paper market, money market funds, and a host of other markets. It's still happening, guys. You are literally watching this transition of wealth right in front of you as they swear this is about helping you. Now, again, as I said from the very beginning, I mean, we took the first two $4.46 trillion altogether from this whole so-called bailout stimulus plan. If you had taken just $1 trillion of that and actually given it to the people, actually given it to small businesses, we would be in a different position, but that's not what happened. Right? I mean, or anyone pretending that all that money, all of that money went to businesses. And instead of doing anything with it, they just helped their business and still fired people, like Boeing, like a lot of them I pointed out already. That's not what it was for. It was not to save the business. It was to save the economy, or so they told us. Saving the business is firing people and keeping the business afloat. Saving the economy would be to use that money to pay your employees. And maybe make some losses, but God forbid this billion, trillions, these huge companies take a couple of losses, right? And meanwhile, the point is they exchanged your loss for their loss. So they're okay with your small business going under. They're okay with you not paying your bills as long as Boeing can just stay around until we get past this. Think about how crazy that is. Look at the money going to Israel. They take just the first amount, just the $3.8 billion in this next year, just that I keep pointing out. You could take that money, divide it up, and do thousands, hundreds of thousands of loans for small businesses. You could literally save the economy with just the money you're giving to Israel for next year while Americans can't feed their families. Why is that necessary? By the way, Israel doesn't need that money. They can be just fine without it. But of course, because you're racist if you argue that you shouldn't be giving money they don't need from taxpayers that can't afford it. Racist. Totally makes sense. Now it says the BlackRock plan further explains why, for the first time in history. Wait, did I just read that? No, that's right. The Fed has hired BlackRock to go direct and buy up $750 billion, almost, $750 billion in both primary and secondary corporate bonds and bond ETFs, exchange trade funds, a product of which BlackRock is one of the largest purveyors in the world. Adding further outrage, the BlackRock-run program will get $75 billion of the $454 billion in taxpayers' money to, guess what, eat the losses on its corporate bond purchases. So they're taking your dollar, your money, right? I mean, almost $100 billion to, just eat the losses of their bond purchases of this company that now drive. I mean, think about that. By the way, which will include its own ETFs, its own exchange trade funds, which the Fed is allowing it to buy in the program. Their own. So now they have control of our tax dollars, and now they have the option to buy the things that will benefit them personally. Gee, I wonder if they're going to do that. I wonder if they'll lean into that and benefit themselves even more. It's not like this kind of obvious corruption and self-serving situations are just not the norm in this country. Of course not. It's not like we would appoint somebody as a vaccine czar that would then make millions of dollars based on that position and then ruin it forever. That would never happen. Why? Because that would be illegal, right? We need to see that we are not even close to what we're being told we are. Or rather, they aren't, right? We are as Americans. They've lied to us. Someone like Salawi being put in the position as a vaccine czar, who used to be on the board of Moderna, GlaxoSmithKline, and was on the board of Moderna, and then also had millions of dollars in stock of the very company that think about that. He sold that money and made a whole bunch of money off of it, sold those stocks, right before they trumped it up with some fake information, and then it went down right afterward. That's illegal. Conflict of interest, but who cares, right? Not when you're in control. Helicopter money is also spelled out in the BlackRock plan, which explains why simultaneously the $454 billion Congress carved out for the Fed under the CARES Act, right? The thing that was supposed to be for you. Remember, they're already getting $75 billion of the money that was supposed to be earmarked for Americans. The CARES Act, right? They've already earmarked almost $100 billion of that to go to be able to buy their own things, to eat their own losses for corporate purchases, and which allows them to buy their own ETFs. Think about how crazy that is. Jimmy, think about how just the $75 billion, think about what that could do for Americans. I mean, even the $454 billion, we're not seeing that. It's simply not happening. So they carved this out of the CARES Act. That was the stimulus package, was also going direct with 1,200 checks directly deposits to Americans and small business. That was the point. Is this the money that they're taking from you, from your pocket? Not just the fact that you're paying for it, but that money in and of itself from your pocket was supposed to go back to you at the crumbs of $1,200. And even then, they're just taking from that. And that's not even. I know people that still have not even gotten their check. It says one feature of the BlackRock plan that is certain to get wide public pushback is the U.S. proposal for central banks to buy stocks. The authors write this, quote, any additional measures to stimulate economic growth will have to go beyond the interest rate channel and go direct. Keep saying this, right? A central bank crediting private or public sector accounts directly with money. Good Lord. One way or another, this will mean subsidizing spending, and such a measure would be fiscal rather than monetary by design, sort of like the plan that they had actually completely played out. This can be done directly through fiscal policy or by expanding the monetary policy toolkit with an instrument that will be fiscal in nature, such as credit easing by the way of buying equities. This implies, I know a lot of people are probably glazing over with this financial talk, but the point is you're being sold out. You are being sold out. Your government is basically selling you out. But it shouldn't be a shock to you because they've done it numerous times before. It says in the United States, approximately 85% of the stock market is owned by the richest 10% Americans. Oh, big surprise. And that's why it doesn't make any sense when they point to the stock market as some kind of actual representation of how this country is. We don't care about the Dow Jones. That doesn't mean anything for most people. When you see this stuff going up, that means those richest 10% just made a bunch of money. Or, it doesn't necessarily mean that, but the bottom line is that they are the ones in control. And the 10% of the richest are the ones that care about that. What Americans care about is whether they can feed their families, right? So when Trump stands up and screams about how the stock market's doing so well and what a great success, if you're at that night you don't have money to feed your family, what does that mean to you? But this is what they keep doing. It says buying stocks would simply expand and accelerate the wealth and income inequality, which is already at the highest level since the 1920s. Right. Okay. I mean, that's the byproduct of being sold out. Right. I mean, that's exactly what it is. The same thing as you're taking your money and divvying it up. It's a transfer of wealth, as I keep saying. So it's only going to exacerbate the wealth inequality and the issues that we have that they pretend it's all your fault. Right. All you got to do is work harder. And obviously, I'm going to go ahead and say that there is a part of that to it, but it's completely rigged. What we're talking the stock market or anything we're talking about here. Now, just so you guys can see, the BlackRock authors, so you guys can see their names, which is always important: Stanley Fischer, Philip Hildebrand, Jean Bovin, Elga Barsh. Now, in addition to this, basically, an example of yet again being able to see that they knew something was coming and didn't tell us. Now remember, has anybody been held accountable for insider trading? Have any of the numerous Republicans and Democrats, or even just Jeff Bezos, who clearly knew something was coming and sold a bunch of stock and made a bunch of money, right? Nothing. Who cares, right? Because it only matters for you peons when something happens. But there's more than that. As it said in that previous article, BlackRock is bailing out its ETFs with Fed money and taxpayers eating losses. It's also the sole manager for $335 billion of federal employees' retirement funds. Now, this is essentially the same idea, but the idea is this is being abused right now, that they are using the situation to essentially bail out their losses and their issues with your money. It says BlackRock, the international investment management firm run by billionaire Larry Fink, pictured right here, has played an outsized role in Federal Reserve bailouts of Wall Street. As it turns out, it's also been quietly managing hundreds of billions of dollars for more than 5 million federal government employees. During the last financial crisis, get this, 2007 to 2010, so essentially before it started, the Federal Reserve gave BlackRock no-bid contracts to manage the toxic assets held in 3 programs known as Maiden Lane, Maiden Lane 2, Maiden Lane 3. So you know what that shows you? That shows you that in the previous crisis, BlackRock was also involved. What do you know? So just like we have Robert Kadlec in position to control the direction of where these vaccine choices go, even though he was responsible for knowingly putting a vaccine out that would hurt people and pushed it on people anyway, and they lost a lawsuit because of it, and and the Pentagon was found guilty, and that's the guy. They were found guilty of using something they knew would hurt people, and he is now in control again. Same way here. BlackRock was a company that was given no-bid contracts to manage the toxic assets in 2007 to 2010. So right in the crux of the problem, they were the ones doing this. No-bid contracts, meaning it's up to them. And they were the ones managing toxic assets held in these programs. So why in the world, if BlackRock was involved in the beginning in this first big crisis that we pretend was totally out of nowhere, why would they be involved again? And why so secretly? Gee, it's almost like they're trying to hide something from you. Now remember, this is how we're dealing with it now. At this time, Maiden Lane 1, 2, and 3, these were special purpose vehicles. Remember that? That's what's happening now. That's what's happening right now between the Treasury and BlackRock. They're creating these special purpose vehicles, and they are manipulating the situation and pretending like it's just what has to be done because of something that we couldn't do. We never saw. Like, remember, this was fake, right? The numbers are false. They lied to you. They're forcing this stuff in. Whether it's real or not, we can see that the numbers are not correct. And yet they still pretend like this just has to happen. No, what needs to happen now is people need to be held accountable. People need to go to jail. And we need to right now basically distribute some of this wealth back to the Americans that you stole from us. But that's not going to happen until we take these people out of control. And we need to work together. But they set these up. This was set up by the New York Fed. Maiden Lane purchased $30 billion of toxic assets from Bear Stearns, remember them, as an inducement by the New York Fed to get J.P. Morgan, all of them, to purchase the good parts of Bear Stearns. Maiden Lane 2 purchased the backed securities, and basically they're just divvying up all the toxic assets. It says, thus, the AIG bailout was actually a bailout of mega banks. Again, exactly what we're talking about. And even then, they covered that up. They hid it underneath what they were trying to sell you as something that was necessary to save the economy. Does that sound familiar? It's exactly what's happening right now. BlackRock was also one of the investment managers for the Fed's mortgage-backed securities purchase program during the last financial crisis. It also advised the Fed on the pool of assets of Citigroup that the Fed ring-fenced and guaranteed. Additionally, the federal government turned to BlackRock to evaluate the toxic assets of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Remember that? You should remember those names after the government seized its entities in 2008. Today, BlackRock has been selected in more no-bid contracts, just like 2008, to be the sole buyer of corporate bonds and corporate bond ETFs for the Fed's unprecedented $750 billion bond buying program, which will include both investment-grade and junk-rated bonds. It says the Fed has said it may add more investment managers to the program eventually. So get this. This is the real point. BlackRock is being allowed by the Fed, and I would argue at this point whether the Fed's even calling the shots anymore, to buy its own corporate bond ETFs as a part of the Fed program to prop up the corporate bond market. So according to a report in Institutional Investor on Monday, BlackRock, on behalf of the Fed, quote, bought $1.58 billion in investment grade and high yield ETFs from May to May 19th, 12th to 19th, with BlackRock's iShares funding representing 48% of the $1.307 billion market valued at the end of the period. Right? No bid contracts, buying up your own products. What could possibly go wrong with that? And as they said in the last one, the stimulus bill known as the CARES Act, your money is being used to, quote, eat the losses in the bailout programs set up by the Fed. $75 billion of it, as the last article said. No bid contracts, just like 2008, and allowed to buy their own things that will benefit them with your money while you can't feed your family. And let's not forget that this is, again, an overtly Israeli government-tied company that controls the Fed in this country. But let's scream about Russia meddling in whatever you want to talk about. It's just unreal. Now, to add one more little aspect of this, I saw something today, it was actually on Dr. Buttar's video that went out, and I wanted to make sure that this was very clear to people. I do think this is very interesting because it does seem to suggest some kind of foresight, but you could argue it's because he's a doctor or because they've had them before. But I've said previous pandemics, in my opinion, exactly like Dr. Francis Boyle said, they made those too. Right? So if you think he has some kind of insight, maybe because they've made these in the past, but it's being represented that Dr. Fauci said on the record that Donald Trump's administration will have a pandemic and it will be a surprise. And that's how it's being framed even in that video. And I find that to be maybe not intentionally so, but disingenuous. It doesn't seem, because here's what he actually said. Now, again, I want you to see that the reason I'm showing this after the first things I talked about is because I do find this to be relevant. Here's what he said directly, though. Quote, the history of the last 32 years that I have been the director of the NIAID will tell the next administration that there is no doubt they will be faced with the challenges their predecessors were faced with. It's quite a bit different, don't you think? Because you could very clearly see that you could argue he's just simply saying they're going to be dealing with the same things that they have dealt with in the past. Doesn't seem anything close to saying they're going to for sure. But then he adds this: we will definitely get surprised in the next few years. I find that over everything else to be a little bit more suspicious. But to take this statement and make it sound like he said matter-of-factly that they will have a pandemic and it will be a surprise is not necessarily what was said. And especially today, guys, we have to be careful with it. We can't play this game. You want my opinion? Do I think Fauci knew and is part of it? Absolutely. That's my opinion, based on just what I've seen, not necessarily that I can prove it. But you see, the problem is I'm not going to say this is what it means because I think it's true. Because it's not what it says. So that, in a sense, would be, like I keep pointing out, would be essentially lying for your truth, right? Misrepresenting, well, like the Bill Gates video, you know? Do I believe they're trying to make vaccines that can essentially remove extremism? I would almost guarantee that it's even, whether they even knew about it before and just saw that video and said, that's a good idea. I really believe they would and have probably tried and maybe are doing that. But the video was fake and it wasn't Bill Gates. So do we share the video and say, look, hopefully it'll wake people up and they'll think it's real and maybe believe it's real because it is real? No, you don't share it because it's not real. It's always more difficult to do things correct, to be honest, do things the right way. So when we say this kind of thing, we mark it down, we remember it, but we don't sell it as Fauci said he knew there was going to be a pandemic. Okay? Because that's just not right. But again, we'll be clear. I absolutely believe that this man is tied up in all of this. Because look, they're not working on vaccines, guys. They're working on weapons. They're adding gain of function to viruses to make them more dangerous. So that is the last thing I would try to pretend is not part of this. But we have to be honest. It's important because we can lose if we don't do that. Now, after all of this, we know it. The numbers. The fact that they're still pushing it in. They're still pretending like we saved you all based on something that we already know is not as severe. There's this weird back and forth between it's equivocation. Equivocation is the word of the day. Whether we're talking about equivocating between things that one politician said and somebody else, or, the reality of Obama versus Trump, or whatever you want to kind of, playing the game when you really shouldn't be doing so. Same thing we're seeing now. And this is really ridiculous. Now, this is slightly taken out of context, but it's exactly what you might think. Let's just put it this way. It's a little bit less ridiculous than it appears in this graphic, but it is ridiculous, period. Health experts support anti-police protests. This is on Fox News. As public health advocates, we do not condemn these gatherings as risky for COVID-19 transmission. That's literally what they're saying in regard to protests, and I already kind of talked about this. But how in the world can you argue that protesting against whatever they're trying to argue, whether it's against, for a Black Lives Matter protest or, police brutality, whatever. They're arguing that any kind of protest in that vein of thought is totally okay, but it says this should not be confused with a permissive stance on all gatherings, particularly protests against stay-at-home orders. So can anybody please explain for me how a protest against a stay-at-home order is in any way different than a protest against anything else? It's not, is the point. It's not at all. And there's no way anyone intelligent could actually argue otherwise. What they actually are trying to argue is that fighting white supremacy or police brutality or whatever I forget what, you'll see it in the next one of these tweets, that is just more important. Okay, so you see where we are now, where now they get to decide, right? Because this is more important morally that I'm going to make the decision for everyone that now, even though you may die and kill everyone on the planet, it's okay because it's just more important. Like that's what the argument, right? Before it was, this is going to kill everybody and we can't, or you're going to go to prison. And then it's, because we have to fight this very serious problem, it's okay to let that be happening. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And you all know that. Anybody honest can see that this is an obvious equivocation. This is a lie. They are misrepresenting because I think they're losing in this narrative battle. But at the same time, they want people out there because it will justify pandemic 2, which I can promise you is coming, whether they lie about it or make it happen. And it allows them to crack down and force in the idea of contact tracing from another angle, as always. But this is everywhere. This is everywhere. Here's another interesting one from Charlie Kirk, of all people, and this is the point I keep trying to make. Kirk's a Trump supporter, right? He says the White House press pool is outraged that the chairs at today's news conference weren't socially distanced. Now he says, why haven't they said anything about the lack of social distancing at the riots they report on? And you know what? He's completely right. Right? That is correct. But my point is, why then can't people still stuck in the two-party paradigm, such as Charlie Kirk, extrapolate that out and go, okay, well, first of all, let's just focus on the point he made. The White House press pool is outraged at the chairs not being distanced. What does that show you, right? It shows you either one of two things. Either the White House is trying to project the idea that we don't believe it actually needs to happen, right? At the very least, that you don't need to social distance, which suggests it's not as severe as we were told, right? Or other than just projecting that, they actually believe it. They believe it's not real or it's not as severe and that we just don't need to be doing this anymore, okay? So if that's the case, why is Trump still asking for stimulus? Why are they still demanding vaccines before we reopen? Why is Mike Pompeo spending $300 million to make ventilators for Africa, even though we know that 96% of the people that use them with this get killed and that we know it's not even as real as they're telling us it is? Right? I mean, I could keep going. There's 100 examples of what Trump's administration are doing that this contradicts. So if they're not social distancing the chairs, why are they still doing the things they're doing? Why have they not rolled back the actions? I said this months ago. For all the people out there supporting the Trump administration, at some point when the actions continue, even though we know this is not as real as we were told, or not real at all, at some point you have to reflect on the fact that the actions are still being driven in, and that has to reflect on what he's doing. Whether you think he's being fooled or part of it, you have to realize that it's happening. And it's not some 4D chess move, that he is part of that problem. And again, this is not an advocacy for the left because they're just as guilty. For those that may be new, it's both of them, both two-party deception, all of it. But I ask why people like this can't take that one step further. Because all they want to do is be like, look at the left, they're contradicting themselves. Well, they are, right? But so are you. And that's the problem of the two-party paradigm. Because if they're not social distancing the chairs, then we need to be going back to normal immediately. And the point is that they try to argue, well, it's the governor's choice. And that's why Trump played it the way he did, pretending like it was all their choice. And he put it in their hands so then he could take credit when good things happen and back away when bad things happen. And now we're at a point where they don't want things to change, so they can pretend like it's a standoff and it's the governor's versus the jury. No, these things are unconstitutional. And we know this. All he would have to do is stand up and announce the numbers and put the information out and say, we were lied to, and it would be over. But he hasn't. And, of course, he's allowing wildly unconstitutional crackdowns around all of what's going on today for the protests, the rioters, the looters, however you want to look at it. There are bad, unconstitutional, unjust things happening everywhere. The two-party paradigm stops people from seeing it. But look, here's another one. 1,200 public health experts advocate mass gatherings because, this is what I was talking about, white supremacy is a bigger threat than COVID-19. Right, it says 1,200 public health experts have signed an open letter asserting that Black Lives Matter mass gatherings should be encouraged because white supremacy is a bigger health threat than COVID-19. Now, remember, they were just freaking out about how minorities were more prone to get COVID-19. Remember that? That was the biggest, oh my God, it's trying to pull in the racial part into the COVID. And yet now, I guess it's okay because white supremacy is a bigger threat. Now, look, even if you believe that, even if it really was, how do you still pretend that the argument that this thing that's going to kill everybody and that you're literally forcefully arresting people for not wearing a mask, suddenly it doesn't matter because of this other problem? I mean, there's just no way you can stretch that logic. This is, in my opinion, one of the most obvious examples of the clear social engineering and the clear brainwashing. I mean, and the point I make before is, think about this like a cult, guys. And I'm referring to both the left and the right here. I'm talking about people in the two-party paradigm. If you see somebody in a cult, and we've seen examples of this in the past, someone, you got people where they're being, raped and molested and abused, and they won't leave. People will come and they'll fight. They will fight to stay where they are because they are brainwashed. They just don't realize it. And then, of course, they'll be saved and 10 years go by and they look back and go, I don't even know. I couldn't leave. I didn't know why. It's because they are brainwashed. And this is exactly what's happening. That we are propagandized. People are actually acting against their own interests because they have been manipulated. And here we are pretending that suddenly the thing that was going to destroy the planet is still serious, but this ideological issue just takes precedent because nothing. It doesn't make any sense. Both the argument is those things are important, respectively. In general sense, the idea of illnesses and racism, but the idea that what they're trying to force on you with this is simply stupid. And the only people that buy it and go with it are people that are either blind to it, lost, part of the cult, or people that want to use it for political agendas, which are a lot of people today. I would say arguably most of the huge social media influencers because it's their business model. Now, as Luke Rudowski points out, this is the kind of normalization we're at, where we know now that this is bad. We know now that the numbers are, but we're just trying to normalize it, right? He says, hey, what are you doing? Oh, nothing, just normalizing martial law with TikTok videos. No big deal. Bunch of National Guard or, whatever military dancing the Macarena in the street behind a bunch of MRAPs and Humvees. Totally normal, guys. Let's just pretend like it's a natural, normal thing that we've completely violated our Constitution because of things that aren't real because our government said we were in danger. But I love this video. It's so cute, right? God, I mean, it's just disgusting. And this is the kind of thing that people buy into because it's trendy, because they'll make it trend on Twitter, or because this is the same as everything else. They are trying to brainwash you. And of course, as we told you was coming, and guess what? As they told you, you were responsible for because you protested, even though they're now saying it was totally okay to do so. But they told you it was going to be your fault anyway, right? Oh, it works both ways. 24 children test positive for coronavirus in a new Vermont outbreak. What do you know? Okay. Let's just say, for sake of conversation, that this is completely real. What does that even matter? Think about it before you get outraged and freak out. First of all, children have every single thing we've seen right up until now are wildly less danger. Right? I mean, it's like basically nothing. The kids just simply do not have, I mean, there have been some instances, but I ask whether that's even real. But the point is, the data has always been the same, that children are at much lower risk. So now we're talking 24 children testing positive for a coronavirus. Okay, but remember, coronavirus, according to their data, is simply not severe. It's less than the flu. So why does this matter? It's an honest question. They're trying to hype you up again, and people are going to go, oh, your masks, lockdown, secure the children, think of the children. As we suddenly forget everything we were told because we just had some race war theater flash before our eyes. And no, that doesn't mean racism doesn't exist. And no, that doesn't mean that there aren't real people out there. It means that they are intentionally manufacturing it. They are using you and your emotion and your valid concerns and your valid outrages with our government and our police force. They're using them. Doesn't mean it's not real. But people are forgetful. We're past it. We're like, what was that thing before? Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, we're like, oh, no, coronavirus, right? And all of a sudden, we're back in it again. How can we possibly be at a point where we need to take any kind of action when the information's coming out that it's just not there? Here is another executive order from New York from June 1st. And guess what you'll see on this executive order? This executive order, but guess what you'll see on this? You'll see a combination of coronavirus and guess what? George Floyd protests. Almost like they're part of the same thing, right? It says, whereas on March 12th, the city issued a declaration of emergency for COVID-19, whereas Emergency Executive Order 98 issued on March 12th and remember, March 12th, they issued an executive order to basically remove your rights and create martial law. But on March 19th, the UK said it wasn't anything to be concerned about. Because that makes sense, right? But whereas they put this executive order out on March 12th, and which at that time extended the executive order for danger, for the national emergency, or rather in regard to New York for COVID-19. But then it says, whereas large gatherings increase the potential for spread of the virus, and whereas peaceful demonstrations began in the city in response to the death of George Floyd. Weird. So now, wait a minute, weren't we just talking about coronavirus? A black man in Minnesota who died after one or more officers knelt on his neck. The latest in a long line of deaths of black. What does that have to do with an executive order in regard to COVID-19? It's almost like they want you to think of them as one and the same. And women that have spurred protests across the nation, but demonstrate activities were subsequently escalated by some persons to include actions of assault, vandalism, property damage, and or looting. And whereas the city, and it goes on, declaration of emergency, COVID-19. And it's almost like they basically want it. They want on the record. It needs to be put down that this happened because it will be referenced. That is, in my opinion, the shift away from the argument that, well, just because the independent media dared not to speak the gospel of the World Health Organization, that's why. No, that wasn't going to work. So maybe they created all of this just for the excuse to point to it and say, that's why. And of course, we had to include it in an executive order about, all you had to do was mention the idea that there were all you needed was that. The idea that gatherings caused the increase for problem. But no, we had to literally put the name of George Floyd into this and then go off about how it happened, why it happened, what they're doing. I mean, how does that even make sense in regard to an executive order for a state of emergency about COVID-19? Don't misunderstand. That's what this is. It makes it very clear it's about COVID-19, but they just included it. There's a clear manipulation taking place here, guys. It's very, very clear. And now we're even seeing members of Congress, members of, just people in official positions, again, trying to add in the same kind of narrative of China bad guy in regard to now the vaccine arm of the same exact thing, right? So it started in China, and there's still, by the way, we're going to get to that next, the idea of the where it started idea and the idea of the, whether it was lab created or organic. But remember, it was all started in Wuhan. It was all China. They did it with the Kung flu and all this different stuff. By the way, I find it really interesting that you'll still see people, you'll see people talking about the plandemic and yet then still call it the Kung flu. Because there's an issue there. Their minds they're still wanting to blame China because that was a Republican point. But, I should argue that was a bipartisan point. But they're still calling it the Kung flu. How can it be fake and manufactured or an illusion or some kind of manipulation, but yet still be China's fault? I mean, I should say that that's still possible. But the point is, within the narrative they're building, it doesn't make sense. Either they were responsible for this and something that's really happening, or it was a pandemic and it was completely made up and falsified. I mean, people who talk about the pandemic are arguing this is completely fake entirely, but yet still pretend China. I mean, you see what I'm saying? The political points warp people's brains and they just can't get past it. But now, again, the point was we're seeing this kind of the same agenda be pushed into the vaccine part of this. After lab leak theory, let's try this. All right. So again, after they kind of didn't get as much traction as they wanted, now they're pushing this in. U.S. Senator teases, quote, evidence, which nothing of the kind, that China is hindering COVID-19 vaccine creation, but doesn't show it. It is unbelievable. Here's what I tweeted out first, and I'll show you what he says. I says, at what point do we wake up and see that the U.S. government never has any evidence for the baseless claims it throws out? And yet, it still uses these assertions to take military and political action. And more often than not, it's later verified that they never had anything. Hashtag Iraq, hashtag imminent threat. But here we are. And listen to what this guy says. I mean, it's embarrassing to watch them try to avoid the question. I mean, this is a very classic political point now. Like someone asks you a direct question, right? What evidence do you have? And you listen to him. He'll go, well, we have evidence. And it goes on to talk about what they're going to do with it. Are you telling me that he's not smart enough to realize that they asked him a question about? No, he didn't want to answer it, so he tries to walk around it. That doesn't. If you come right out and say, "Look, I'm not allowed to talk about it," that at the very least would seem legitimate. But no, it's because just like always, he doesn't even know what it is. All it is the quote intelligence community. You know, the one that lied about Iraq, the one that lied about Bolivia, the one that lied about Venezuela, the one that lied about Syria, the one that lied about on and on and on and on. Those ones, same ones. They just said to him in a briefing, we've got evidence, and that's what he gets. Then they may even showed him something that suggested something, but it's nothing of the kind, and it's always nonsensical. Now, let me ask you this. Do I believe that China is trying to do all kinds of things illicitly? Of course I do. In this case, what actual sense does it make? I really, you could make some argument. But nonetheless, even if China is actually trying to do this, until our government gives us anything other than this is happening, trust me, you should not be believing it. It's amazing to me that the people out there that will continue to buy this, because it's obviously politically beneficial to their side, but we just witnessed them getting caught in lies. Literally how many times I could point to? And yet we'll swing back around and be like, no, it has to be. Why? Because it's politically useful for them. And they're supposed to say things that their side tells them they're supposed to say, right?
Right now, where are we? We got to get this vaccine done. Unfortunately.
You know what? Dang it, I should have downloaded this one. It hasn't seemed loud enough for me. Let me know if you guys can hear that in the chat. I'm going to try to turn it up as best I can. Oh, here we go. Let me know if this is loud enough for you.
Right now, the way I look at it is, where are we? We got to get this vaccine done. Unfortunately, we have evidence that Communist China is trying to sabotage us or slow it down. If we do it first, or England does it first, or anybody in Europe, we're all going to share. Communist China won't share, so we got to get that done.
So basically, he just rattles off, like, first of all, do I think that China would try to sabotage this for profit? Of course. Why not? Right? If they're working on something, but again, recognize we're talking about something that a lot of people don't even believe is necessarily real. So they're working on a vaccine for something. Would they try to sabotage each other to make the money off of it before the other one could? Of course they would. But listen to what he's saying here. He just arbitrarily throws out, and this is the kind of kind of McCarthyist mentality that is absolutely irrational. To say that, and it doesn't mean it's not true, but it's based on nothing but his opinion and the idea that it's politically useful for them to frame China in this way. Where he says that, well, we're all going to share, everyone's going to share, except that's not even true. Most people in the world have already argued that they're not going to, like Trump has tried to buy one from Germany, tried to buy one from everybody else, and they're saying, no, we're going to use it for ourselves. That's not even what's happening amongst the allies, the way he's trying to paint it. But then he says that, well, of course, because communist China won't share. Okay, that's actually not true, at least what they're saying, but I'll let you finish the video first.
Unfortunately, we have evidence that communist China is trying to sabotage us or slow it down. If we do it first, or England does it first, or anybody in Europe, we're all going to share. Communist China won't share, so we got to get that done. We still have a lot of work to do on the COVID testing side to get more tests out there. The businesses are open.
Sorry, can I just pick you up on that? When you say that China is trying to stop the West's development of a vaccine, what evidence do you have for that?
Sure, Andrew. So what we have evidence that what they're trying to do is sabotage or slow down our ability to get this vaccine done. It's really important that...
Oh, so right there. So we have evidence for the thing you just asked about. And it's really important that we get that done. Is that an answer to what is the evidence? Not even close. And he knows that.
We're going to open up our economy, but we're going to really open our economy when everybody...
So he asked about, what is the evidence you have? Why is he talking about opening the economy? Because he's reeling for anything to talk about, because he knows he's on the spot about something he either knows nothing about, and his job is to sell you on the idea that there's some quote unquote evidence, just like they had about Iraq, just like they had about on and on and on. Or he's willfully lying about it because he's part of the lie.
Everybody says, hey, look, I can get a vaccine, and I know there's therapeutics that I'm not going to die, right? Those are the two things. And China does not want us, England, any Europe, they don't want us to do it first. They've decided to be an adversary to Americans and I think to democracy around the world.
So they've decided to be, you see how this gets immediately political? Like, look, I'm not going to argue that China's not trying to do what's best for them in every way they can at the expense of anybody when necessary. But is that any different than what the U.S. government is doing? In fact, far, far worse. That they're pretending they're fighting for democracy while destroying countries that don't do exactly what they want in their authoritarian way. Right? I mean, it's no different or better than what China's doing. So to pretend that there's some kind of adversarial thing fighting against American people is just a flat out misrepresentation. And this is so you in your mind are thinking China bad guy, and now they're trying to stop us from making a vaccine because they're trying to hurt us because COVID, and guess what? It's going to come back around. It's all part of this building narrative. And it all comes down to the fact that he's saying, we have this, trust us. I can't show you. Because we should totally believe that from the lying government that's lied to us about every other thing before this in the past.
And this is just one evidence of that.
But China can't...
This is just one evidence. See how it finishes that? He finishes by saying it's just one evidence of that. What is? His forceful statements about evidence? Does that even make sense?
England, any Europe, they don't want us to do it first. They've decided to be an adversary to Americans and I think to democracy around the world. And this is just one evidence of that.
But China can't stop us developing a vaccine, can it?
Right?
Sure. It came through our intelligence community.
Right. Okay. So he says China can't stop us doing this, right? And he goes, sure. Basically, so, but my intelligence community told me so. So there you go. Right? So because my community told me, my intelligence community said, then it's just the truth. Right? Despite the fact that the logic says, how can they possibly stop you? Right? I mean, it's just so stupid. This is farcical to me. It's like watching a cartoon. Who in the world still believes these people?
So I'm on armed services, so clearly there's things that I can't discuss that I get provided information. But there's evidence that they've been trying to either sabotage or slow it down. I mean, this vaccine is really important to all of us getting our economy going again. And there it is. This is so important to getting our economy going again. What, you mean a vaccine for a thing that's less dangerous than the flu? A vaccine for a thing that is not actually, I mean, everything about it. From the top to bottom, what they're telling us about this thing has been shown to be incorrect. But yet we still need to wait for a vaccine? How in the world does that make sense? Do we need a vaccine for the flu to open our country again? Believe is whether England does it first or we do it first, we're going to share.
And that's not actually true. It's really not. We've already seen the back and forth happening between the UK and the US and Donald Trump and talking about how he won. Donald Trump tried to buy a vaccine from a foreign country already one time and said that he wanted to buy it only for Americans. That was on the record. But let's pretend like we're all friends and we all work together, all except evil bad guy China, right?
Communist China, they're not going to share. They don't share. I can't give you an instance where Communist China has tried to be a great partner to the rest of the world. They've decided they just want to dominate the rest of the world.
Oh, really? You mean more so than the U.S. government is? Tell me when the last time China overthrew a country and conducted a regime change. When the last time China has been continually bombing countries and murdering families and starving people to death. Yeah, remind me, right? I'm not arguing that China is not an authoritarian country that is very dangerous. My point is, that's ridiculous to argue that we're some that the government of the U.S. is some freedom-loving force and they're the only ones fighting for. I mean, it's just stupid. I mean, everything about this is absolutely disconnected from the reality, the facts of what they are and what they've done, and in the same way in regard to China, right? I mean, there are numerous examples of how they have, in fact, helped other countries. Brought in regard to COVID-19, in regard to Venezuela, in regard to plenty of times where they have in fact brought things to help these countries that were under the yoke of the U.S. government. But of course, that doesn't, in their mind, that's bad stuff, right? Because helping the people we're trying to destroy is bad guy stuff. So we don't count that. It's all about perception, guys.
I can't give you an instance where Communist China has tried to be a great partner to the rest of the world. They've decided they just want to dominate the rest of the world.
Senator Scott, thanks very much.
Oh, have they decided that?
Right now.
Right? I mean, it's just, it's lovely how he can just tell us what they're thinking. Because Mr. Scott here must know exactly what the Chinese government as a whole are thinking. It's just so silly that we take these things at face value. It really, really is. But overall, more than just that, the point was that this article makes very clear that China is absolutely saying the exact opposite. Okay, it says, this is from Scott still. It says we have to got that. I want to be redundant here. What was the part I'm looking for? Now it says China hasn't shown that it could be a great partner to the rest of the world as its government decided they wanted to dominate the rest of the world, he says, is the end, with no trace of irony. Previously in May, hold on, I'll make sure I'm not skipping this. Yeah, okay, it's right here. Now, hold on. Now, the point was he's saying exactly what we just listened to. And of course, not showing you anything indicating any kind of actual evidence, seeing as how they've lied about everything like this before. But it says that conversation turned slightly inconvenient. The U.S. Senator proclaimed that whether England does the vaccine first or we do it first, we're going to share. Of course, China won't. Just as Scott spoke, China's science and technology minister pledged that his country, and mind you, this wasn't after he saw Scott speak. This was while Scott was speaking. China's science and technology minister pledged to his country, first to step into the fight against COVID-19, would make a vaccine a global public good when it finally arrives. Right? Think about that. So as Scott is saying, they're never going to do that because they don't. And of course, China could be lying. But think about how embarrassing it is for them to continually try to paint them as what ultimately the U.S. government is. And then whether China is choosing to play the good role because it's beneficial to them, even if they're really mentally trying, we're going to use this to get, which could be possible, but it's in their best interest to play the role because the U.S. is so clearly what they're trying to point everyone else out as. So and either way, they publicly said that they're going to allow their vaccine, if they get one, to be a public good for everybody. And here's Scott saying the exact opposite, as Trump already tried to buy a vaccine only for us from another country. It just doesn't end. Like now, I'm not arguing that China is going to do anything other than that, but the point is there's nothing to suggest it. We have no evidence of it. What evidence do you think that they possibly have? Again, as I always say this, I say this every time, especially in regard to Iran. If the U.S. government actually had evidence, like literal, here it is, show you evidence that China was trying to sabotage the vaccine or do something, do you think that they would not show you? Do you not think that they would use it in every possible way? It would be on the front page for a week straight. Look at what they're doing. We told you. And they would use it to lean into the other thing and say, look, they're doing this because they're trying to cover up where it started. That they would use it. Same thing with Iran. Do you think if they had evidence Iran was building nuclear weapons that they keep lying about, that they would not show you? It's just irrational. It really is. They would never stop talking about it if that was the case. And here we are again. And of course, this all has to come back to this idea about whether or not this was something that was manufactured. And again, that is not off the table. Because as I keep saying, my opinion here, based on everything so far, which is just an opinion, is that ultimately it seems to me that there is something. But it just simply wasn't as severe, which is what we're finding out. But I'm still of the mind that this is something that was manipulated. Because that's what they've been doing. I mean, we have evidence of that coming from Fort Detrick, coming from numerous locations. Dugway and all, we've talked about these. They're making weapons. At the very least, they're making more viral viruses, right? I mean, that's what they're doing. So we need to ask ourselves whether or not that's what this was. And all the evidence seems to be there. And the reason this is being brought up yet again is because there is yet another thing coming out. This is from a Norwegian study, I believe, saying again that this is something that they are certain, or not, I shouldn't use the word certain, but they're very adamant with the fact that this is pretty clearly something that was not natural. And it's, of course, being censored. Big surprise. And this was a great video today from Derek Brose. All of this will be in the show notes, again, as I said, when I'm done. Called Controversial New Study Claims Coronavirus Created in a Lab. A few things he pointed out in the show today that I'm going to be mentioning, but the good show. I hope you'll watch it for yourself. But it's important that we look at this stuff. And this is actually from disclosed.tv. Sequences on the surface of the COVID-19 virus indicate that it does not originate from nature, but was probably developed by Chinese and American scientists. Now, it's important, right? Because this study seemingly, and a point that Derek also made, that like if this was something that they were using, it was part of some agenda, I would think it would be being talked about. Sort of how the other ones have, right? Nature had one article or one study that worked for them one time and they talked about it for a week, right? While pretending it was the only one. And there's 40 other studies out there. I mean, I'm just throwing a number out, but I've seen, off the top of my head, realistically, I think I've at least seen at least 12 or 13 different studies so far that most of them have leaned in the direction of it's not natural. But of course, the mainstream media picks out the one, talk about cherry picking, and says this is the only one that's real and legitimate and, whatever, because it said it wasn't, which seems to be the outlier. That doesn't make sense at all. But this study is not being heralded. Doesn't mean it's necessarily real or shouldn't be doubted or shouldn't be questioned. But the point is they're talking about the reality of the situation, that this was developed, if at all, by Chinese and American scientists in collaboration. Remember, as we keep pointing out, the Wuhan lab, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, was getting money from the U.S. government. Okay, it was being funded from the U.S. government. The lab was built by France. I mean, the U.S. was involved in that. They got the actual material for coronavirus from North Carolina University, from the U.S. They were working in conjunction with Harvard for a long time before this, where Charles Lieber worked on nanotechnology in regard to mimicking viruses, right? This is all stuff we've talked about. But they worked together. In that lab, there was U.S. personnel. And remember, on top of that, the World Health Organization, up until recently, was funded predominantly by the U.S. government, which means that they predominantly used U.S. personnel. That's just how it works. So that means when this began and the World Health Organization was on the ground dealing with this, right in the beginning, there were U.S. personnel present, which means the U.S. was aware of everything right from the beginning. Even though Trump tries to pretend like we didn't know, even though we were taking action before that, even though the UK government said in March 19th that it's not severe, even though everyone knew everything that was happening right as it was happening because it was all over social media. But apparently because China said something and a week later said something slightly different, that changed everything. It's anybody else's fault. But the reality is, guys, if anything happened, both of these people are culpable. And of course, it could be one or the other, right? It could be just China, just the United States. I argue if it was going to be China, the last thing they would do was do it in their own country, but it could be just one or the other. But until we know for sure, you can't just be like, well, it's in China, and well, it's a Wuhan lab, and well, but surface level points that it has to be only China because Kung Flu, right? Because bat soup, all these stupid buzzwords that don't mean anything. This is the opinion of the Norwegian vaccination scientist. We'll just call him Sorensen. And this was the actual article. For some reason, this didn't translate, but I had these over here just so I could remember what they said. The title is Norwegian Scientist Creates Dispute Over the Origin of the Virus. This virus does not have a natural origin. And the first little paragraph here above it, it says, sequences in the surface of the coronavirus indicate that it does not come from nature, but is probably developed by Chinese and American scientists. This is the opinion. It's the same thing it basically says, but then it adds, he is supported by the former spy chief of the British. It's quite interesting, don't you think? For those that can read Norwegian, it's going to be in there for you to look at. But we also have the update. But this is the original. This is where it started. And I find this very interesting. So you guys can see this. It actually said, this was the original title, as Derek also pointed out in his video. Norway scientist claims report proves coronavirus was lab made. So that's what Forbes put out first. Then they changed it. Now, I know this is hard to see, but for some reason, they kind of, like it says right here, this page is no longer active. But weirdly enough, you can still see it, and you can even scroll. But it's whited out. But it says now, controversial coronavirus lab origin claims dismissed by experts. Don't you love how, so I put this out, it's based on a scientific study, and arguably, I'll tell you why, there's some conflicts of interest here, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still something that just needs to be, either disputed, looked into further. But the fact that it actually challenges anything, again, while we know the information is going this way, right? Don't forget that. They're still pulling stuff down because it challenges the scientific community. Excuse me. That's the point. Whether we're talking about the World Health Organization or anything, you just simply can't challenge it, even though they keep getting it wrong. Or I would argue, keep lying to you. But as you can see right here, or rather maybe not, I can read it just barely, but maybe you can see it. It says June 8th, and this is really interesting to me. This article has been substantially updated. So basically they changed the title, changed everything. So not updated, they literally rewrote the article to reflect criticism of the published study. Not new information, but simply criticism from authority figures. Think about that, along with the general scientific consensus. Okay, so this is new data that they felt was legitimate enough to publish. Then because, I guess, people criticized it, probably the government, and then the people that were already there, the current general consensus that they were no doubt already aware of, spoke up. Right? So basically, the second part of that, I think, means nothing. I think the fact is the government or somebody in control reached out and said, hey, you can't do that. So they changed the article. Right? Think about the idea of censorship and manipulation. They try to frame those free press in this country. Look at what just happened. Right? They get contacted and they change the content. Sounds like Israel. Sounds like China. Right? We've seen those things happen there all the time. I point out that on Times of Israel and Haaretz all the time, where the government reaches out and they make them change the title. Substantially updated because they got criticized and scientists said, we disagree. They already knew these things. This is the beginning of it as it was first published. Norwegian scientist Sorensen has claimed the novel coronavirus, or SARS-CoV-2, is not natural in origin. The claims by the co-author of the British-Norwegian study, published in the Quarterly Review of Biophysics, are supported by the former head of Britain's MI6. Now remember, there's any number of reasons why there could be an agenda here to set this up in order to frame one side or the other. Right? I mean, think about that. Even with MI6 especially. I mean, the idea is that there's agendas here. So no matter what, just because it aligns with what you might already think, you should not just be buying this lock, stock, and barrel. Question it, always. I do think that this is what the reality is, but it could be, we could just as easily be tricked by this stuff. My point only is to continue to question these things, guys, no matter how legitimate it looks. And that's exactly what they don't want you to do. Now it says, the study from Sorensen and British professor Angus, however you say his last name, show that the coronavirus's spike protein contains sequences that appear to be artificially inserted. And this is exactly what we've always been saying. Remember the Indian study that got forced down? Same way. They came out with the study, and because they didn't like it, they shouted them down until they pulled it back. It didn't stop being legitimate. The data was still correct. They just pulled it back because they got political pressure. That is the scientific elite that we keep pointing to. And it's not just elite, not in the sense that they're the best, but because they're just the elitists. They are the oligarchy, right? And that they have some kind of scientific, technological power structure where they can protect, and they're using these things against us. It is a religion. So they also highlight the lack of mutation since its discovery, which suggests it already fully adapted to humans, right? No one wants to counter these things. The study goes on to explain the rationale of the development for, and this is where it gets interesting, the BioVac 19, a candidate for vaccine for COVID-19 that is now in advanced preclinical development. Now, so you guys understand, the person, Mr. Sorensen, is in fact involved with the creation of this vaccine and the company, right? So there's a conflict of interest there. So essentially what he's saying is, okay, because they're basing this on something that's incorrect, just like we've been saying from the beginning, right? The idea that, okay, so in the very beginning, they scraped something from someone's lung in China, and ever since then, they've just asserted that that is COVID-19. Hasn't been proven. As Dr. Kaufman has pointed out, they did not even follow their own guidelines. They actually just changed the way they do it so they could meet what they were getting and say, yep, see, COVID-19. The fundamental ways, it's Koch's postulate, that's what it was. Koch's postulate is what you're supposed to do in order to prove that there's a virus there or that it is a virus. They didn't do these things. Nobody denies that. They just changed the way they're supposed to do it. So it worked for them. Right? The point being that we've gone over since then, assuming that's what it is. And the argument is, and I agree, that if you're basing that, the vaccine production on the thing that's not legitimate, you're not going to have a vaccine that applies properly to this thing. If they even care to do that. I don't think they do, but the point applies. So he's saying that, well, we understand it. We're doing it correct based on the right thing, whatever that may be, and that's why our vaccine is going to work. Now, obviously, that's wildly suspect. The guy, that's a huge profit motive and a huge conflict of interest. So at the very least, you should be going, maybe, just maybe, this guy is, doing this because he wants his vaccine to succeed. But it's up for you to decide, as always. The reality is this is being censored very harshly to the point where they're actively altering things. I mean, that stands out to me for some reason, but you don't know for sure. But at the end of the day, even this former MI6 guy is saying that it's an accident from a Chinese lab, which again, that's why I'm curious and suspicious about this basically just being led back into the idea that this is, all China bad guy based on the same flimsy narratives, even though there's far more evidence. But nonetheless, guys, it's still being ignored. And here's the actual study for you to look at, as actually Derek found in his video. So, again, I hope you guys will watch. BioVac 19. The idea, guys, is that there are numerous. I'm pretty clear. I'm pretty confident to say that most of the studies we've seen, most of the comments have been from people that are saying that this is not what we're told. This is artificial. It's being manipulated. Right down to the person who drafted the U.S. Biowarfare Act, Dr. Francis Boyle. An expert, one of the leading experts. But yet, all they can do is point to one of their studies and their officials and their experts that are paid by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or tied to the National Institute of Health. These people that are obviously involved, and they tell you otherwise. We just need to begin to think about this stuff and realize how clearly this is being used to trick you, to manipulate you. In every possible way. I think we need to acknowledge that this has been a lie. For those out there that believe that this is something that's still happening, and I'm one of them, I think there is something, doesn't mean you have to fight against the people who think it's not real at all. The point is none of us know for sure. But as always, as I try to be the bridge between these different opinions, that we need to just realize that we've been lied to. And then maybe even against party lines, if there's people still, well, I think the Democrats lied to us. I think the Republicans lied to us. Okay, fine. Just put it aside, disagree on that for the moment, and just realize that your government is trying to deceive you. But the problem is with that, it's pretty damn impossible if people are still lost in the two-party paradigm, as I always say, but can't hurt to try. The bottom line is we need to work together. We need to see that this is pretty much the biggest deception I think I've ever seen pulled off. And we're not talking just this country. All right? And now, with everything that's been going on with regard to the protests and the rioters and the agent provocateurs and everything that's going on, it's just a continuation, an extension of the same exact plan. Idaho National Guard reportedly sent 400 soldiers to Washington, D.C. This was updated yesterday. Or technically, it was updated 56 seconds ago, but it was posted yesterday. So this is not old. This is new. The bottom line is the Idaho National Guard has sent several hundred soldiers to Washington, D.C., guys, and look what it says, to control George Floyd protesters, right? Because apparently simply protesting, as the article literally says itself, necessitates some kind of government control, right? Because you don't have a right to do that. You need to be controlled. In a release late Friday, National Guard said that it had sent approximately 400 soldiers in violation of Posse Comitatus on June 5th to assist with guarding federal monuments, buildings, and other property. The soldiers will augment. Now, I will admit that there is a caveat here for the National Guard in regard to the Posse, but it's not how this is supposed. The idea is the National Guard or any military is not supposed to be deployed domestically to enforce domestic law. That is a violation of Posse Comitatus, but they don't care about it anymore. They don't care about anything constitutional. But the idea is that it's supposed to be guarding the nation, right? The National Guard, like as things coming from outside, not policing, but they've done it in the past with protests and different things. So it's become somewhat of a precedent, even though they ignore other precedents that violate other, it's just, there is no law that guides these people at all, right? We can have a precedent in our legal system, or we can have 4 federal judges that rule stopping people from boycotting something is unconstitutional, and yet they'll pass laws that literally say you can't boycott something, right? But then simultaneously they'll turn around and say, well, there's a precedent that says we can use this because we did this before. Okay, so you're ignoring, it's just like they ignore UN mandates, but then enforce them other places. These people are hypocrites, guys. And the only people that choose not to see it or can't see it are those that have a vested interest in the two-party paradigm or lost to the lies. And you know my opinion. I think you in the chat are the majority. We just need to realize that. 400 soldiers to assist with guarding federal monuments, buildings, and property. The soldiers will augment the D.C. National Guard and serve in support of the United States Park Police and Metropolitan Police Department. So enforcing the law. This is military enforcement on the ground in Washington, D.C. It's called martial law, guys. I don't care what you think or what your equivocation is, what your justification is. This is martial law. You have curfews, you've got soldiers on the ground. But I'm a conspiracy theorist, right? I want you to watch this. This is something that Derek also filmed in regard to, I think this is the VP of the police, shoot, I'm blanking on the name of it now. Not the lobby. Anyway, this is a person high up in regard to how, police essentially enforcing themselves, right? And so if somebody remembers the term, I'm blanking on my name, you put it in the chat. But so this guy is a person that has somewhat level of power over how the direction goes. And he walked out and spoke with these people. So to some degree, good on him for coming out. But I do think this was meant to sort of placate people, just kind of the way he conducted himself. But watch what he says right here. I'm only going to show you 2 quick parts of this. And what I'm trying to show you here, and I only have a few examples, and I want to go into some statistics with you in regard to what's going on today in the whole police aspect. But what he says here shows you the contradiction, even though they don't realize it. Where he says in one sitting that sometimes you have to do things that might be a little bit morally ambiguous, or not. I didn't say it like that, but like basically do things that are not the law. Like rubber bullets, for instance. That's what he was talking about, and using them in a way that's not necessary or against people that aren't actually violent. Well, sometimes he basically alludes to the fact that you just have to do it, right? So, okay, so you're willing to ignore the law, even a small one, where it just needs to be done. But then he simultaneously swings around and says, well, we don't make the laws. We can't pick and choose. It's just ridiculous how even in one sitting, they can contradict themselves. And it's because they believe, maybe even rightly so, in their minds, that they believe that they have to because they're doing it for good. And maybe they believe that. But at the end of the day, they are violating their own oath in enforcing the law because they choose to, because they've been told that they are justified in doing so.
They were arrested
But they were
on the
also
sidewalk
pushing
too.
people off
Now
the
Yeah, I was arrested on the sidewalk.
They were.
footage of that.
I have a 4-hour live stream with all this. I mean, I'm going to use it when I go to court because they gave me this obstructing passageway or whatever.
So our issue with that is, again, that's a command decision.
Well, so what we're saying though is you are the VP though of the police union, and you know
There
a
it is,
statement
union.
from you guys goes a long way.
I'm going to support what they have to do to take care of the mass majority of people.
I'm going to support what they have to do to support the mass majority of people. He probably meant to say vast, but so that's very clear, right? So that suggests that you're willing to kind of do things that may be inappropriate or violate their constitutional rights or take a little bit excessive force. But it's because we just got to do what we got to do. Now, remember that, because there's a statistic we're going to get into next, which shows you that exact point. that most of them feel that way, that they're willing to violate their own rules and laws as long as it's about getting the job done.
Okay, we have to keep it under control. We have to keep it peaceful. And when that turns, then we have to deal with it.
But do you think the approach of militarizing cops into an already peaceful situation? Because I was there.
Now, that's basically it. Now, the point is that, as Derek is pointing out, that ultimately, they were. Derek was there as a journalist. He was on the sidewalk as well as other people. And because somebody somewhere decided that all of them were now violent, they just kettled them all. And by the way, I'm not going to play this part, but it's there's a level of this which I know for sure he's being dishonest, because Derek asks him directly about kettling. He knows damn well what kettling is. That is a very, very documented concept, and it's very contentious, and it's something that they teach. And he asks him, and the guy goes, "Oh, I don't know what that is." And then Derek pushes him on it, and it's very clear he knows what it is. So there was a point in there where he knew they were doing something that, again, is exactly what he just said. Something that, may not be exactly legal or appropriate, but they do it because they need to get the job done. Now watch what he says here.
Okay? Y'all both are the people that make the laws.
That doesn't make a difference.
It does.
But you
if
are,
you want a law change, you need to get it
you are
changed.
the officer of a union that does represent the people that do enforce the laws, and that's why we're here talking to you.
Right.
officer.
And that's why you got to understand. We don't get to pick and choose what laws we follow and what laws we
But you have a moral compass. You should follow what's right and
Exactly. Right. I mean, that's always the point. Oh, I'm just following orders, right? Didn't the Nazis say that too, right? I mean, wasn't that all about the Nuremberg trials? It's amazing how we have precedent doesn't matter when they don't want it to, right? But when they want it to, of course, precedent's everything, right? But he just said in one sitting that they're do what they have to do to get the thing done, and then we'll simultaneously swing back around and say that, well, we don't get to pick and choose, except you literally just said you do. Interesting, don't you think? Now check this out. This is pretty wild. Now this was a Jimmy Dore show. Cops were caught on the radio. Remember that scene we showed where the police cars in New York City ran over the protesters? I'm sure you all remember it. Right? This was right then when these people said that, look at what they said. And the whole point is this speaks to the overall mentality, the institutional problem. Not that every single one of them is the problem, but that there's clearly an institutional problem, right? So we need to deal with the system, not the people. And it's not to say that there aren't people that we should deal with too, but the point is the system needs to change first. Check this out.
Well, TMZ got a hold of some of the police recordings over the police radio. You want to hear this? This is after the cops had run over people.
So we have a group of people blocking traffic on Albany and Dean Street. They're refusing to let the orange go eastbound on Dean Street and Albany. So we're stuck here. Run them over. Shut the motherfucker up. Don't put that over yet.
One cop says over the police radio that the protesters blocked the street, so we're stuck here. And the other cop says, run them over. Because they just did. And the other cop says, shoot those motherfuckers.
Caught that in time, didn't I? Family friendly here. Now, I guess I missed the first one though, but sorry about that. I forgot that was in there. But the bottom line, guys, don't say that over the air, right? Don't let everybody see what we really think. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, and look, you could argue that they were just speaking anger, they're emotional, whatever. The point is that this is the way that they think. Do you think the people that talk like that and speak like that, those were two of them in regard to somebody else who then just ran them over? So at the very least, there's three people in that chain of discussion that were willing to do so. And then they actually did run them over. So clearly it wasn't just a joke. But the point is that do you think people that talk like that and think like that and take actions like that feel that they're bound by some kind of law or bound by some kind of authority or accountability? No. It's only very recently that they feel that they're even slightly getting held accountable. And that's the problem, right? So you get, this is where we get into the discussion of where this has gone to today, right? This idea about defunding the police, which is so damn contentious. And as always, there's something in the middle of this. As I talked about yesterday, and I'm going to get into slightly again today, the reality is there's something to that, but it doesn't mean that we need to just get rid of everything. And when I said that the other day, people said, that's not true. That's not what they're trying to do. Wait a minute. Dang it. Right, okay. I made this point the other day, and I said, okay, well, the idea is it's ridiculous to pretend like, that we can just remove the police department in the situation we currently have, and that's going to be good for everything. And immediately people said, oh, you're being ridiculous, Ryan. No one's calling for that. Oh, really? Yeah, exactly. Like I said, I do speak off the cuff all the time, but I don't just assert things that I just think are happening. Like, this is what they said. They are called, some people at least, and now clearly a large portion, are literally calling to disband the police department, not just remove some of the funding, but remove them. Now realize, guys, that there's an issue here. As I said the other day, coming from a very libertarian, anarchistic standpoint, which anarchy doesn't mean chaos, for those that may be new. Chaos means chaos. Anarchy means no rulers, not no rules. That's the deception. The only ideology where there's no place for our rulers. I wonder why they don't want you to realize that that's a possibility. Anarchy is a very functional possibility. The problem is that our society has been so brainwashed into the reality and dependence on the government that if you just flip the switch, it will be chaos, because people don't know how to function in a real society without government overlords, because we've been brainwashed for centuries. But the point I'm trying to make is that there is a discussion to be had for why there's a different kind of thought out there, even in regard to removing them. But again, understand that takes huge societal changes, which I'm up for, but most people won't want to get into. The point is that there's other versions of it, constables, other community-based enforcement, but again, this is just so outside the realm of thought for most people. So that's why I'm not even getting into it. The point is, within the current structure, I just want people to realize that I do understand the mentality there, and that's something that I actually want to continue to strive for. But you can't just force these things in with on a dime. In the current situation, you can't just remove this, because it will actually create more issue for the government to utilize, to abuse, which I think is part of the point. But realize that there are people literally calling for that right now, and I think it's part of a manipulation. I really do. But we're talking about these people doing these things, right? That very clearly there's an institutional systemic sentiment there, and lack of concern for actual accountability or following the law. And we do know people that are pointing that out, and rightly so, and saying, we want something to change. Now, first of all, I want you guys to be very clear about this outside, aside from the racial discussion of either side. This is a great point here that Prison Policy Initiative makes. Not just few bad apples. U.S. police kill civilians at a much higher rate than any other country, or rather than other countries. And I believe it is any other country, any other wealthy country. Police violence is a systemic problem in the U.S., not simply incidental, and it happens on a scale far greater than any other wealthy nations. And I'm going to show this to you pretty damn unequivocally in the statistics we're going to go through, as well as the fact that there's parts on both sides of this argument which are legitimate, and of course parts on people that are still stuck in the two-party paradigm will probably take issue with because they were told to by their gospel speakers on their podiums on Fox or CNN. Right? I mean, there's going to be something, that's not true. I saw the statistics, and they just won't listen. Understand, I could be wrong. But the fact that people will refuse to listen to an alternative perspective because they were told already forcefully that this was the reality and didn't care to look any further because they already choose to trust these people is part of the problem. But check this out. U.S. police kill civilians at a much higher rate than police in other wealthy countries. Number of people killed by law enforcement per 10 million in the most recent year with available data. Okay? 33.5 per 10 million. The next closest is Canada with under 10. Then dramatically down when you get to the Netherlands, 2.3. Take a look at Japan or anything. I mean, it's zero. Norway, zero. How can you possibly pretend like this is what it is when you have countries that have zero? These are human beings that live in the same world we do, with the same social media and the same, you know what the difference is? By and large, it's the things that our government do to us. The propagandization, the militarization, the manipulation, the fluoride in your water, these are things that absolutely have an effect on you. and just simply the fact that our government is a problem. But they want you to think it's all for your safety, right? It's all because these are bad people, and it's all your fault somehow. Here's another one. U.S. police kill far more civilians annually than any other wealthy country. Total number of people killed. And I believe this one was maybe 2017, 1,099. Next closest, Canada, 36. Again, Norway, Iceland, 0. So just so we're clear, guys, there is a problem. I don't care what anybody wants to say. This is a very, very real, very big problem. And it applies to everybody who lives here. But there, in some ways others, it goes back and forth, right? There are statistics that will show you all kinds of things. And as always, statistics can be manipulated, can be fudged and tweaked and shown by omitting other things. And this is what they're all doing. So let's start with the main one that we seem to be constantly pointing to. Okay, this is from 2017, 2020. And yes, this does show, based on the data of just simply broadly put, number of people shot to death by police in the United States. So very simple. Okay, and you can see, and let's just take 2017 first, because that one was much higher, 457 white people. That same year, only 223 black people, 179 Hispanic, 44 other, which I don't know what that, and then 84 unknown. Okay, so this is being heralded by all kinds of people saying, see, white people are hurt more. And maybe that does seem that way when you just look at this, and maybe that could be the case. First of all, realize that you could very quickly add all of the minorities together and it would be more than white. So that's one thing you could point to. And I'm not even trying to lean one way or the other politically. I'm just trying to point out basic fundamental truths. You could easily do that. And then you could argue, well, minorities are hurt more. That's not what I'm even trying to say. I'm just saying that's something you could do. But then you could also argue that this is data coming from people who we have no right to trust or believe, lie about damn near everything we get. So the point is just you have to take these things with a grain of salt. But going from this forward, it seems pretty clear that there are more white people who are shot. Any year you look at, by the way, anyway, right now up to 2020, we're at, is that the 2021, I believe? No, red is 2020. So we're at 172 so far, white people, 88 black people so far in 2020, which is just outrageous. I mean, we're trying to equivocate and defend one or the other. How about we just realize that, a lot of people are being shot and killed? Like, that should just be outrageous to you. The point is now we're getting pulled into the racial divide, the debate, which, by the way, again, there is a discussion to be had that needs to be had there. But first, just realize how sick it is that we're only concerned about who's more right, when in reality, this is where we're at. That we are all part of this. We are all being killed and shot and we are under the subjugate. We are under the rule of these kind of maniacal people that are telling us that over 1,000 people shot is normal, while other countries have 0. But let's get into the main statistics that I want to go over with you today. These are actually 42. Now, I actually just now realized that I wanted to go through and pull these out, and I forgot about that. But let me try to pick out the ones that I thought were the most relevant. Some of these things are very, very important to think about, because this seems to be a solid picture, right? No, it's not. Because when you add these into the picture, and, motivations of individuals and individual perceptions and, just simple, whether you're talking about people who have racism in their hearts, or people who are choosing, any number of basically nuance of the discussion, right? To just simply say, look, more people are shot in this way is not all encompassing. So let's go through these and you'll see what I mean. Police officers are indicted in fewer than one. And again, most of these guys are, again, to my larger point, which is this is something we should all care about. No matter what race you are, no matter where you're from, no matter your creed or religion. The point is that we are all living in a position that we need to not be okay with. But on top of that, I will show you a couple more things. Now, police officers are indicted in fewer than 1% of killings. 1%. But the indictment rate for civilians, for you, 90%. That doesn't make sense, right? So when a police kills somebody, 1% of the time, where they're indicted for a crime, right? 90% for you. Because you're, innocent until proven guilty, right? Number 2, on average in the United States, a police officer takes the life of a citizen every 7 hours. Every 7 hours. Again, think about a place where they have 0 deaths in an entire year by police shooting. And yet in our country, an officer takes the life of a citizen every 7 hours. Totally normal, right? In 2015, no, this wasn't one of them. 52% of police officers report that it is not, and this is one of the ones I want you guys to remember, these next two actually. Remember the video we just showed you, right? Where he is saying, well, we don't get to pick and choose. And the other one he's saying, well, sometimes we got to do what we got to do, right? 52% of police officers report that it is not unusual for law enforcement officials to turn a blind eye to improper conduct of other officers. Okay, so even if you're arguing it's a bad apple, whatever, more than half of everyone they talk to is willing to ignore it, which violates their oath. There you go. I mean, that's pretty damn conclusive. This one's even worse. 61% of police officers state that they do not always report those serious abuses that have been directly observed by officers. So not more than that. So 61% of them, not even just the 50%, but 61 in total who even see it, do not report it. Not always. Right? So even just those two stats alone show you a systemic problem. A very, very clear problem where most of these people do not even think they need to hold themselves accountable. Right? Who watches the Watchmen, guys? Right? Who watches the Watchmen? That's the whole point. If nobody's holding these people accountable, they're not accountable. 43% of police officers agree with this sentiment. Quote, always following the rules is not compatible with the need to get their job done. That's exactly what we just heard him say. That's exactly what he just said. That basically, you just got to get it. And when Derek was talking to him about that point, he was discussing rubber bullets and how they're being used against protesters. And technically, they're supposed to be shooting them off the ground so they bounce. And now they're shooting people right in the face and people losing eyes. And, but he says, well, sometimes you got to do things like that. That's basically what he said. And the point is, they're admitting, almost half of them, that sometimes you just can't follow the rules because you can't get the job done. Well, then you shouldn't be a police officer. 84% of police officers have stated in a recent survey that they have directly witnessed a fellow officer using more force than was necessary. 84% of them. 84% have seen somebody else committing police brutality. And remember that 61% of them won't tell on those 84%. You beginning to see the picture here? Just 5% of the police departments in the U.S. contributed statistics to a 2001 report that was created to track police brutality on civilians. So in 2001, they pretended to try to hold them accountable. They created a report to track it and then depended on them to report on themselves. And big surprise, 95% of them didn't do it. So you could either argue 95% of them just didn't think they had to do it, or 95% of them were guilty of doing it and didn't want to tell on themselves. The estimated cost of police brutality incidents in the United States is $1.8 billion. Remember, the NYPD gets $6 billion a year. $6 billion. In 2019, it was $5.8 billion. $6 billion. That's more than a lot of countries' entire military budgets, and we're funding the NYPD, one of the most corrupt police departments in this country. $6 billion. And guess what? The estimated cost of their police brutality, $1.8 billion. You know what that's called? That's called the cost of doing business. The same way that Wells Fargo will, factor in billion-dollar fines for their constant crimes because all they do is get a fine. So what do? They just pay off the billion fine. They make $10 billion that year. Hey, it's all good, right? You factor in the cost of business. So you're going to pay $1.8 billion for your problems? Okay, it's okay. We're going to get $6 billion next year anyway. 93.7% of the victims of police brutality that involve the discharge of a weapon are men. Police who are African American are twice as likely to be killed by a police officer while being unarmed compared to a white individual. Right? Excuse me, people. People who are black are twice as likely to be killed by a police officer while being unarmed compared to white people. Okay. Now, again, you can ask whether this stat has been manipulated or, whatever. But these, as far as I can tell, all of these, the ones that I'm interested in showing you are correct, that I've looked into myself, at least as far as I can tell. Okay. So ask yourself, in a situation where we have more white people in general apparently being shot, according to the stats, but yet people who are black are twice as likely to be killed by an officer even when they're unarmed. So you see how that plays a little bit of a different tune on this statistic? Okay, so fine. So, because here's the thing, guys. You have to remember that in these numbers, it's everyone, right? So we're talking about people who are holding up stores, people who are robbing different things, people who are stealing cars, people who are already armed, right? And stealing and doing crime. And so they're getting shot in the process, right? So a big portion of that and big portion of any of these are going to be, or just to say a portion, is going to be people who don't factor in to the police brutality, to the people being shot scenario, right? So that these numbers aren't necessarily sound until you add in the nuance. As always. Isn't that funny how that works? The point being that in this case, what we're seeing when you can realize that a black person is twice as likely to be killed when they're unarmed in that situation, that highlights the problem. Now realize, guys, that if we're talking about more white people being shot and black people less, but still they're twice as likely to be killed when unarmed, you're still seeing a problem that applies to all of us. But I would argue suggests that there is something there. And again, remember, guys, on this topic, before I keep going forward, that we need to remember things like the fact that it's verifiable that Richard Nixon, let's say, I'm sorry, I was reading the comment real quick. And Richard Nixon is the one who openly, this wasn't knowingly on the record, but this is an actual quote from Richard Nixon when he said that and this is paraphrasing, that the war on drugs was created in order to affect predominantly the black community. Right? This was about using it. I mean, we even talked about Richard Nixon using drugs and the idea to frame them and to influence the Black Panthers. And so the whole idea is that this is an overt campaign to manufacture things against the black community to arrest them unjustly. Okay? That was back in the Nixon era. So different time, obviously. But are we going to pretend that that's not still some sentiment that's been built and cultivated throughout the year? It's clearly there. So people that are pretending like there's not some racist aspect to a country that so many years ago was complete, the whole Jim Crow era and all this time we're talking about, there's something there. Now, is it the problem and to the length and the breadth to which we're being shown in the media and with these crazy Black Lives Matter protests and people praying on the ground and all this stuff? No, I think that's crazy irrational. That's just my opinion. And there's probably people going to call me racist for even saying that, as I'm literally fighting for the overarching problem that we're all dealing with. But the bottom line is that those stats are legitimate, that there is a problem there. And it's clearly, in some ways, far more prevalent for people of color. And that's just a simple fact. And it's so frustrating that we have to equivocate with this and play the two-party paradigm game. Overall, all of it aside, the government is still using all of this against all of us. And that's always been my point. But we have to weed through all of the BS just to get to the reality. And that's exactly what they need, what they want. Keep it going forward. And this one I found really important. You know why? Because no one seems to be caring about Native Americans right now. Guess what? Native Americans are just as likely to be killed by law enforcement officials in the United States as African Americans from 2019 to 2013 data. Right? So if everyone is up in arms to the point to where they're marching through the streets about Black lives and everything that's happening, what about the Native Americans? They're just as likely. So it's the same data. So they're being killed just as much in the same way. But apparently we only care about one. Why? Right? Is that not racist in its own way? Couldn't you equally call the black and white people racist for not caring about the Native Americans? I mean, it's just so funny how we pick and choose. It's politics, guys. And as always, that doesn't mean that their issues and their grievances are not legitimate. It simply means that politicians, social engineers are using you and you don't even know it. How crazy is that? Right? And Native Americans are just as likely. Well, we just apparently don't. And look, they've got more of a grievance than anybody. We occupy, they're the very first regime change of the U.S. government, right? 1 in 4 people who are killed by law enforcement officials in the United States are unarmed. Let that sink in. 1 in 4. In general, black, white, up, down, left, right, doesn't matter. 1 in 4 who are killed are unarmed. But yeah, totally okay. And it's all good, right? It's all about freedom and democracy. 1 in 4. 25% of people who are killed by law enforcement don't even have a weapon. We thought we saw he was reaching in his pocket. It's all his fault because he twitched. Remember the guy crawling down the carpet I don't think that was the Las Vegas example, but the guy that was in the hotel, remember? And the guy was on the floor and the cops were screaming at him. And because he tried to pull his shirt down after he was obviously panicked and scared, they killed the guy. I mean, it was just so disgusting. And this is the kind of thing we're talking about. And that was justified, according to the police. Out of the 2.3 million people who are incarcerated in the United States right now, an estimated 1 million of them are black. A little less than half. Now, of course, you could argue it's because they committed most of the crime, and I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. There are some places you can see statistics, but at the end of the day, if a system is broken in a way that's leading in this direction, right? If half the time, more 50% more likely to be shot when they're unarmed, doesn't that seem to suggest that there's something more to this story? Again, people, you're going to get mostly the Republicans, I would imagine, within the two-party deception, who are going to scream that I'm just playing the leftist card. Oh, I'm just the mainstream media now, as they go watch Fox News. Facts and the truth aren't assigned to one party, guys. Just because one guy, just because it aligns with CNN to push this right now, and it may be actually a correct thing, doesn't mean that they're being honest or that they have the right agenda. It just happens to align with that. The most common form of police misconduct in 2010 was excessive force. Most common form. This is similar to data that was collected in 2001. So basically, over the process of 10 years, it didn't change at all. The most common thing they did was abuse their power. It's exactly where we are now. Guess what? The second most common form, sexual assault. Does that sound like a normal thing? Does it sound like a problem where you got countries where zero things like this are happening? No. It sounds like a problem where we have a rampant authority figure or authority structure that is just allowed to go crazy because it works best for a fraudulent government. 1 out of every 3 people that are killed by police officers in any given year in the United States is black. Where you live, Matt? No, that wasn't the one. This basically suggests that, well, this was kind of interesting. Where you live matters when it comes to police brutality. This was interesting. If you are African American, you are 7 times more likely to be killed by a police officer in Oklahoma than you are living in Georgia. Oh, wait, that wasn't the one. There was, maybe I thought that was the one. There was one that taught me, maybe I'll get to it. There was one that talked about one having a lower crime rate, and it was actually more dangerous than the one with a lower crime rate, which doesn't really make sense. It's 17% of the 100 largest cities in the United States, police officers killed black men at a higher rate than U.S. murder rate of 2014. All right? So think about that. 2014, the overall murder rate for everyone was lower than the rate at which 17% of the largest cities were killing black people. Now, again, you could make arguments here. I'm just simply giving you stats. Although Chicago draws a lot of attention due to its total numbers of murders, I think this was the one, including a threat from executive office to bring the feds in 2017, it actually ranks 25th in the 100 largest cities for police officers killing black men. I mean, we constantly hear about, Detroit and Chicago and they're focused on how that's the big, how is it that they're 25th in regard to that problem? Even though they're literally arguing to bring in the feds. That just doesn't make any sense to me. 69% of the victims of police brutality in the United States who are black men, or just black in general, were suspected of a nonviolent crime and were unarmed. Again, that one seems like a pretty hard stat to ignore. 69% of the victims of police brutality, almost 70% in the United States, in general, right? So all the stats, again, going back to this and saying, okay, so, or this one, you can see more at a lump sum, right? So we're thinking of that number, but using this nuance, 70% of all victims of police brutality, which involves shootings and everything else, in the United States who are black were suspected of a nonviolent crime and unarmed. 70%. Okay. I mean, these things are continuing to baffle me. Oh, this was the one I was talking about. So the level of violent crime in U.S. cities are not a factor in the likelihood of police brutality occurring, which I find really interesting. And I think this speaks to the core of the problem. It says an individual is 15 times more likely to be the victim of police brutality in Orlando, Florida, compared to Buffalo, New York, even though Orlando has a lower crime rate. Think about that. This isn't even about race. This is just bottom line. What does this show you guys? It shows you that Orlando, their institutional, their mentality, the way they train, the way they run, the way they conduct themselves, is just more violent. They have less accountability. They do whatever they want, right? So they have a lower crime rate, but the people who they enforce against are 15 times more likely to be the victims of police brutality. So some may argue, well, good, the police rate, the crime rate is down. So, those are the people that would argue if you've got nothing to hide, then if you've got nothing to worry about. This is just a bootlicker mentality, right? You are allowing an authoritarian police state because you think it makes you safer. When in reality, all it adds is another level of danger. 97% of the cases of police brutality that were tracked in 2015 did not result in any officer involved being charged with a crime. 97%. I mean, good God, 97% of the cases of police brutality in 2015 did not result in any officer being charged with a crime. I mean, that's just unreal. So 27% of police killings. And remember, guys, how difficult it is to get something passed where they even look into it. So when they go into these cases that were tracked, meaning that there was something to them, 97%, nothing. 27% of the killings, police killings in the United States, were committed by police departments with the 100 largest cities. Let's see, black people were 39% of the people killed in the 100 largest cities, despite being only 21% of the population in these cities. Only 3 police departments. Let's see. Gosh, there's a couple more that I wanted to share before we end the show here today. Police officers are 18.5 times more likely to be killed by that wasn't the one. That one confused me, actually. Some of these are so interesting. I hope you guys will go through and read these for yourselves. This speaks to the idea, and Carrie Wedler made a great video about this. 135 police officers were killed in the line of duty in 2016, which was the highest number of fatalities in the past 5 years. Right? So the point is that the ultimate number in general, as they continue to try to frame this all the way up until today as some kind of war on police, has been going down. The number of police officers who were killed in ambush-style attacks, 21. Anyway, I feel like I'm just, I know there's a couple more that I wanted to share. It's my fault for forgetting to pull these out. But 39% of African-American individuals who were killed by police during their arrest were not attacked when they were killed. Anyway, you guys get the point. I mean, these statistics, guys, are based on the data. And of course, I call on you to go out and verify them for yourselves. Take a moment to go through these things and look into them. You'll find the same as I did, that most of them are based on just the same kind of data, which can be manipulated. But when you take the full picture, right, even with the first statistic in regard to more people being shot, there's a nuance there, and it does not make sense when you pull it out. But the real point is that we're all dealing with this, guys. We are all living in a situation where these people are acting with impunity. They are not being bound by their oaths. They are not upholding the Constitution. They are actively. I mean, one of the things Derek asked the guy as well is that if you were given an order to shoot protesters, would you say no? And of course, he wouldn't answer the question. And the idea is that of course he would, because he was given an order. He just said that. So at the end of the day, the law doesn't play into it. It's about authority. It's about control. And that's exactly what we've been saying from the very beginning. And as I showed you a moment ago, the idea is that this is something that they're calling for right now. To disband, to remove it, which I think is a sign. I think this is meant to create the problem they want to point to, because this doesn't make any sense. And I argue that none of them actually want to do this. And as Derek said, and this is the point that I'm trying to make as well, for those who are new to the idea of defund the police, or my fave, disarm the police, I recommend reading this piece wrote back in 2014. Do autonomous community defense groups offer a safer alternative to traditional policing? So people are misunderstanding or maybe intentionally misrepresenting the idea of, and I'm not all of them, as I said, be clear that there are people who are calling for this. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what Derek is saying. Right? To defund the police is a general hashtag, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they should be completely removed in this context. I would argue that both Derek and myself agree, and this is just my guess. I mean, I would have to ask him, but I do believe that we would agree that there is the time and place for completely removing them if we can build the community in that direction, right? The idea of their authority, in my opinion, is completely defunct. But where we are now doesn't make any sense. Because all it's going to do is create a lawless reality where the government will swing back in and take complete control. I think that's what it's meant to do. But what he's pointing out here is there are alternatives. People see this as just a blanket statement that we just need to remove them. And that's what I'm trying to point out is the irrational, all-encompassing two-party paradigm version of it. No, there's something to be said here for realizing, okay, so the police in New York City are getting $6 billion. Gee, maybe we should pull back on that. Maybe we should not give them militarized weapons and give them the authority and impunity to act with it. Maybe, you know? I mean, it's just crazy. And of course, you get the partisan divide and they argue extremes on either side. And guess what? Nothing changes, which is the point. As I said, there is an alternative, guys, where we can realize something that would work for us. All we need to do is, think outside the box. Stop drawing within the lines they give you. And of course, now, as I pointed out before, we have a Democrat announced police and justice reform legislation. Now, I am very suspicious about this whole thing. But I will point out that at the very least, the bullet points they're talking about, I don't understand how anybody can disagree with these things. That's why I think there's something very disingenuous about all of this. But of course, these are the key points. I will argue as I go through this in depth, which I haven't had the time to do today, that there will be plenty of things that I'll probably point out tomorrow or the next days that will be very suspicious and suspect, such as including things that are here. I actually point of fact there's actually something right there they list, right? I pointed this out the last time they tried to force this thing in. It will make lynching a federal crime, federal hate crime. Why? Lynching is already a crime. Why in the world do you need to make it into some racial pointed crime? It's a crime. If you're going to lynch somebody, which probably means you're going to kill them, they should be put in prison. Why would you then make some kind of new crime that's more, so basically you'll go to jail longer if you do it to a black person? I mean, what does that even make sense? That is a social justice talking point. That is a political talking point. And look at these people wearing their African scarves. I mean, it's just insulting. They are patronizing you. But the point is, these things, demilitarizing the police by limiting the transfer of military weapons, of course, for crying out loud. I mean, the point is, guys, even the Democrats, Republicans alike, they just shouldn't be, let's say they accomplish all these things. Good. You don't get any credit for that. All these things are things that you did. So all you did was remove the problems you created. That's what Trump keeps doing. You don't get to create some chaos in Iran and then do something that you pretend de-escalates it and then say, yay, look at what I did. No, you created a problem and then just fumbled away from it, and that doesn't do anything for anybody. This is the same problem. Militarizing the police was brought in by Obama and made worse by Trump. Okay? It's a bipartisan problem. Combating police brutality by requiring body and dashboard cameras. Okay, that should have been done a long time ago. It's already been there, and you allowed them to choose and remove them, and you gave them, again, the impunity and the ability to not follow the rules. It's your fault. Should have been done from the beginning. And again, that was a bipartisan allowance, banning chokeholds or no-knock warrants in drug. See, again, in all cases, there should be no reason why you should have a no-knock. I mean, the idea is that is used and almost entirely creates problem. Talk about Duncan Lemp. They just murdered him through his window, right? That's what that creates. And of course, banning chokeholds. They'll never want to do that. But of course we should, because that kills people, as we continue to see. Ending racial profile. I mean, isn't that already a crime? So, I mean, this is just ridiculous. This whole thing seems... I argue that people like Pelosi, they wouldn't have allowed these to happen if they thought they were problems. This is placation. This is manipulation. And I argue that, first of all, this bill will probably not even pass. The Republicans will shout it down, and they'll say or add new things, and they'll change it altogether, and it probably won't happen. And all they'll do is the Democrats will push it forward as, see, we tried to change the world, and the Republicans didn't let us. Just like the same narrative that goes back and forth, right? Bush was going to change the world, but the Democrats wouldn't let him. Obama was going to change the world, but the Republicans wouldn't let him. Trump was going to change the world, but the Democrats... Oh, God, I'm so tired of it. People still buy it. But the point is, guys, these things are no-brainers, and they should have been there a long time ago. Right now, this is what you're seeing in Philly. Or technically, this was on the 6th, but nonetheless, we are seeing huge, massive protests. And the idea is, guys, how can you possibly pretend, as they've been trying to, and look at this, has 32 million views. That is outrageous. 32 million. Talk about viral. You know, you got these Fox News and CNN clips that get, 50,000 views, and it's like, that's what everybody thinks. Nope, this is whatever. The point is, these are real. And yes, there are looting, and yes, there are riots, and yes, these are happening. And yes, I can prove to you that in some cases, those are police doing it. And in some cases, they are creating the chaos and making it happen, as is they've done, in foreign policy as well as in this country, more times than I can count. But just look at that. That is a peaceful protest. That is people marching in unison in support of whatever they're trying to change. Everyone's trying to frame this as being only about George Floyd and police brutality, but I have on the mind that there's more going on here. That is something we should be concerned about, and something, as I just pointed out, very clearly needs to change. But it's about so much more than that. That's why these are happening around the world and not just in this country. It's time for change, guys. Now, to finish out, I'm actually not going to go over this entirely because I took a lot longer than I wanted to for the show today. But it's important to get you guys understanding of these things. There's a great article by Gareth Porter. FBI launches open attack on foreign, quote, alternative media outlets challenging U.S. foreign policy. Now, again, this is how insulting it is for people like Pompeo to just ridiculously pretend like only China censors and media, and it's we're all fighting for freedom here. And as they're just creating disingenuous policies that try to make it seem like all they're attacking is foreign stuff, when all they do is pretend you're foreign, right? They'll pretend like you're. I've personally had stuff censored for being some kind of, it's a Russian bot thing. It's like, what are you talking about? A Syrian girl got called a Russian bot. She's obviously not a bot, and they called her a bot on live TV. How stupid is that? They're trying to do that so they can frame these people as foreign. This is under FBI orders. Facebook and Google removed American Herald Tribune, an alternative site that publishes U.S. and European writers critical of U.S. foreign policy. This is from Gareth Porter, which I really hope, if you're not familiar with, that you take the time to check out. Great writer. Great site, by the way, Consortium News as well. But so it says the FBI has publicly justified its suppression of dissenting online views about U.S. foreign policy if a media outlet can be somehow linked to one of its adversaries. So if they can find a way to even suggest that you're somehow linked to them, or even parroting views without unknowingly or whatever, that they'll take you down. And that's what's happening, right? That's called censorship. That is called the lack of a free press, the lack of free speech, at least when they want to. The Bureau's justification followed a series of instances in which Silicon Valley social media platforms banned accounts following consultations with the FBI. So the FBI told them to delete them, and they dutifully did so. In one case, he talks about the American Herald Tribune because they were talking about foreign policy, right? And the point is the Bureau has never offered a rationale for why they even did it, despite its private conversations with Facebook. Does that seem like an accountable constitutional? Think about how crazy that is. You're talking about a backroom discussion with a federal bureau telling Facebook to remove something based on politics. Didn't even give them a justification. They just removed it and banned them. That is the unaccountable world in which we live, framed as some kind of freedom-loving democracy. The FBI's first step toward intervening against dissenting views on social media took place in 2017, the creation of the Foreign Influence Task Force, the Bureau's counterintelligence division. Guys, this is against you. Remember, like I told you, the FBI, federal bureau, locally, just domestically. So we're talking about the reality that was created under the guise of fighting foreign things, like even with Patriot Act, and all they did was point them at you. Counterintelligence is meant to be talking about, countering foreign intelligence. But this bureau is countering you as Americans if you talk against what they think. Kind of scary, isn't it? It's the truth. Next, the FBI defined any effort by states designated by the Department of Defense as major adversaries to influence American public opinion. So understand what he's saying there. The FBI defined any effort by states that they deem bad guys. So even if they're not, right? So let's just say Iran is a good example of someone they've lied about every possible way they can. What they're saying is because we say Iran bad guy, that means that anything they do to influence opinion, including saying what they believe is the truth, is counterintelligence. You see how that works? And now, so if I then discuss something that is the truth about Iranian foreign policy or their nuclear program, I am now they need to counter that because I am now a problem because they have deemed them bad guy. Now, somebody made this point the other day. They said everyone, even in regard to the rioters, right? They're just simply saying everyone arrested was a rioter, everybody. Even though I know, for instance, Derek Brose, who was a journalist, who was on the sidewalk, also got arrested. So, no, sorry guys, it's not everyone. Even if you think it's most, it's not everyone. But I believe by and large that they weren't rioters, but they're saying everybody was. Sort of just like they say, well, everybody in that area was a terrorist, right? Well, because Obama said that any military-aged man was one because we just by default say so. Or they say, well, if we designate an area as terrorist area. So if we bomb that area, anyone that was killed was a terrorist. Doesn't that seem convenient? Even though we constantly point out that 90% or more, based on their own stats, were civilians. Okay, so in the same light, if we can realize that they're willing to broadly say anybody just because they're present is a terrorist, do we not realize that they would do the same to you? That simply existing in the same space at the same time just makes you guilty of whatever they think up? Great point by somebody. I forget, somebody said in the chat. That's where we are. So suddenly, they're all just rioters because they want them to be. Just like everyone's a terrorist when they want them to be. Even though they just murder families in Yemen and Syria and Afghanistan. And we know that as a matter of fact now. But at the time, they called them terrorists. Well, now at the time, they called them all rioters. Now, again, at the time with this article, well, they call you all foreign intelligence. Just as a broad sweep because they've already said they are, no matter what. It's the illusion of freedom. It's the panopticon, right? In February 2020, the FBI defined, I just realized I said I was going to move on and I'm reading it anyway, but so be it. Let's get done. The FBI defined that threat in much more specific terms and implied that it would act against any online media outlet that was found to fall in line with its ambit, with the scope of what they're talking about. So they basically said, if you parrot the ideas that we don't think are legitimate, that we're going to remove you, and we're just going to frame that as foreign intelligence. Isn't that convenient? That's called censorship, guys. I mean, think about if I woke up today and I had an idea that I hadn't heard anywhere else that I just organically thought up in my head that just so happened to be the same thing that Iran was saying. That will get censored under this same logic. Even though I didn't hear it from them, even though I'm not being influenced by them, but even just I thought it up myself. You're not allowed to think those things. That's the point. It's thought police. At a conference on election security, David K. Porter, who identified himself as an assistant section chief on the Foreign Influence Task Force, defined what the FBI described as, have you heard this before? A malign foreign influence activity as, quote, actions by a foreign power to influence U.S. policy, distort political sentiment and public discourse. Okay, first of all, influencing policy doesn't imply that you're lying or that it's false. Speaking up about the truth, such as, speaking about, from WikiLeaks, having documents that they claim came from China that tell us the truth, from Russia, even though they didn't, that tell us the truth about our government, right? That was the truth. But they weren't okay with it. Why? Because it influenced the direction. They can't have that. So they don't, truth or not, they just simply don't want people influencing them, as well as they use the word distort. They're very deliberate. You know why? Because again, distort does not mean to lie or to falsely represent. It just simply means to change. Then you could use distort in a way that could imply that. But distort, look at the definition of the word, just simply means to just alter the current status of what it is. They don't want things altered. They're happy with their wildly fraudulent, completely dishonest structure that completely confuses and lies to everybody. They're happy with that. And they call it freedom and democracy, right? So what the problem is somebody comes in and says, here's what's really happening. Ooh, that's a malign foreign influence. Because they don't like it. And guess what? They're censoring people like me because we're trying to tell you the truth. Because they claim we're a foreign influence. Porter described information confrontation as a force designed to undermine public confidence in the credibility of free and independent news media. That is a quoted description. This is designed to undermine people's confidence in the independent media. Because, of course, to them, they're pushing consumers, like their dark craft and practice to push us there because it's much easier to push false narratives. Oh, really? It's clearly much easier to push those obviously false narratives from the mainstream media, and that's why they want you there. There's much more in here that I hope you'll read. I don't want to take too long, but I hope you guys will go through this and read this stuff because it's pretty damn crazy. But here's the ultimate point here. Remember this bill? Or excuse me, the executive order, which is how we rule this country today. Donald Trump. I pointed this out at the time, and it seems incredibly relevant now, as there may be a point that I was going to talk about. The idea is ultimately this is about countering foreign stuff. I mean, that's the way they're framing it, right? But it's being used to actually censor Americans under the guise they're censoring foreign influence. But remember when they put this in there? Differential policies allowing for otherwise impermissible behavior when committed by accounts associated with the Chinese Communist Party or other anti-democratic associations or governments. Right? Very specific. In an executive order directed in regard to preventing online censorship. I told you then, and I'm saying again now, there's a reason that was in there. It's directed at this agenda. And it all started a long time ago. If you remember, when Obama was president, the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act. So they're building the stones, right? They're building the agenda. This was the same thing, and it was used to counter and attack us. And this is the next evolution of it. This was what set the stage, creating the justification to frame us as terrorists legally. Right? This is what it is. And of course, that was prefaced by the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012. Same thing. A different NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act. Of course, every time they do it, there's another, liberty, right stealing thing they put in there. This was about the modernization of the Smith-Mundt Act, which essentially the Smith-Mundt Act, if you guys don't know about this, was an act that basically said that our government wasn't allowed to use propaganda on its own people. And of course, they couldn't have that. So in 2012, they modernized that act and they framed it as a way to help us. But all it really did was allow them the legal right, even though they were already doing it, to lie to you. That's literally what this is. And I recommend all of you go through this in a fine-tooth comb or just maybe check out my past writing about it or past videos about it and realize that all this did was allow the government, in their mind, the legal justification to literally create fake news, create fake movies, fake videos, fake anything in order to lie to you for, quote, national security. Just like Bolton would say that he's totally okay with lying as long as it served the interests of national security, right? That's what this is. So that news story you saw last night about the protests or that news story you saw last week about COVID-19, it could be completely fake and that would be legal because of this act. Because in their minds, it serves some vague national security interest. So that's the point, guys. It started then, it came to here, now we're here. And they're using it all to go after you, to stop you from being able to speak about things that they don't want you speaking about. This is, and the lying and the deception are just so incredibly flagrant right now. It's obvious. And this is why they're coming over the top to try to stop us from talking about it. Check this out. Syrian Girl points out the president of the United States just admitted that Colin Powell lied about Iraq's WMDs and led the U.S. into disastrous wars in the Middle East, which he continues. She's not kidding. Look at what he literally said. And this is what I keep pointing out about Trump not, like, he just saying whatever he thinks. He thinks he's being so smart and witty on his Twitter account and whatever else when he speaks off the cuff, and he's constantly pulling the mask off. And I don't think it's intentional. This is meant to disparage Democrats. It's meant to disparage that idea. But what it ultimately did was admit that he's aware that it was based on lies and happy to continue that war. Colin Powell, a real, and the only reason he's saying this is because Colin Powell came out and said he was going to vote or couldn't vote for Trump. So of course Trump can't take that because it's a minor slight to his picture of himself. So he comes out and attacks him every time. All right. Saying you're not going to vote for Trump is not an attack. But for him to come out and say things about this person and like personal attacks on him, like he does every single time, shows you the child that he is. And that's not meant to be a partisan attack. It's just, I don't care if it's Obama that said it or any Democrat or Republican. To act this way is childish. And any Republican out there defending it, deep down knows that. A real stiff, who was very responsible for getting us into disastrous Middle East wars, just announced he will be voting for another stiff, sleepy Joe Biden. Didn't Powell say that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction? They didn't. But off to war he went. Like literally trying to make... So he says he's going to vote for somebody else. So you try to pull off... You basically admit to one of the hugest deceptions of our country's history that you're taking part in today because you think that benefits you in this minor personal point. Gosh, that's just unreal to me. Now, the point is, guys, he's happy to admit that there was nothing there. So why is he still there? You could argue it's because we destroyed the country and they pretend they're trying to help it, but no, they want them out. They've continually voted them out and they just don't care. He's not going to leave. So think about how disgusting it is that he's happy to admit, because it helps him in this one small point, or he thinks it does, that was a fake, but there was no evidence for it. And yet he's doing the same thing today. Oh, and guess what, guys? As it's still happening right now and everything's going on, guess what they're not telling you? That they're still deploying people around the world. The Idaho Guard, of all people, deployed operations in the Middle East and Africa. A-10s and about 400 airmen with Idaho National Air Guard. Now, this is interesting because I believe this was people that they were either recently deployed or first deployed in regard to the Washington, D.C. we talked about earlier. But either way, whether they were sent there and then redirected or whatever, we're still talking about people like, why not just send them home? Why do we need these people all around the world during this situation? It's because this country cannot function without its military efforts. And that's not what Americans want. That's what this government wants. 400 airmen with the Idaho National Guard recently deployed to the Middle East for ongoing operations to serve as a quick reaction force if needed in Africa. That's and. For what? A quick reaction force? Why do you feel like you need to react to anything in Africa? Is that serving the national interests of Americans? I thought it was America first. I thought it was, we don't need to be the policeman of the world. I thought it was, we're not going to force our way of life on anyone. Those are all things that Trump said before he got elected. All of them aren't happening. The deployment is the wing's second largest movement ever, including pilots, security forces, maintainers, medical personnel, special warfare tactical air control party, and other support staff deployed to an undisclosed location, guess what? For Operations Inherent Resolve in Iraq and Syria. Maybe they're sent there to continue to burn those fields for Trump. Freedom Sentinel in Afghanistan, and, get this, quote, the new normal. A U.S. African Command mission? Guess when created? 2012. After the 2012 attack on the U.S. consulate in Libya. You know, that complete fabricated, the completely misrepresented false thing that we were told about, right? That whole lie, right? But it's called New Normal. So they just sent more troops into New Normal, which is a U.S. Africa Command mission in Libya, according to this release. I just find it to be really interesting that they have a whole thing called a New Normal right now. And it's in 2012. Anyway, nonetheless, they're still pushing in new people into Syria and Iraq, and neither country wants them there, and neither country needs them there, and neither does this country. We don't need these people in these countries, but they have to do it because I argue there's very clear agendas taking place. There's oil being stolen, and there's occupations being made. There are things taking place that they don't want you paying attention to. But I mean, even though the guise of the pandemic and whatever else was saying, how do you justify this? How do you justify these kind of things? The fact that Netanyahu and Israel are still annexing land, even though that completely contradicts the supposed deal. But guess what? Thousands in Israel are protesting it. I mean, our own government in this country is happy to pretend like that's what all the Israelis want. Literally thousands of people are marching through the streets. And I mean, look at this picture, guys. That's in Israel. That looks like hundreds of thousands. The point is, our own government is fighting for this because that's what Israel's government wants. It has nothing to do with what's right, what's legal, or what even any one of the peoples of these countries actually want. Or in some cases. There are plenty of Israelis that want this, I would say by and large. But realize there's a lot of them that realize that this is wrong. Oh, guess what? Also, 12 killed in drone strikes on Iranian positions in Syria. Yeah, that's Israel, again, bombing Syria and killing people. that they claim are Iranian positions, but are just people in Syria. Think about how crazy this is. This continues. That they're continuing to kill people. Last week, there was another strike we talked about, right? 12 killed. I mean, at some point, there just has to be a line for somebody out there. How can we continue to justify this when Trump is burning their food, when he's stealing their resources, stealing their fuel for both for cooking food and for heating themselves? And Israel continues to bomb Damascus. And of course, it says right here that they violated Lebanese airspace, as they usually do, which is, by the way, also a crime. Nobody cares. Why? Because they act with impunity. The U.S. government, the Israeli government, the Saudi government, any other ones that back it up, can picture it like the rogue police forces in this country right now. And all the other countries are the people that are allowing them to continue to beat people up, right? You're all responsible. And every single one of them are guilty of allowing the situation. For the Syrians that are being killed, for the Venezuelans that are being killed, for the Yemenis that are being killed, for the Palestinians that are being killed, for everyone right now that is still being killed actively while we pretend like it's totally justified. You're all guilty. Every single one of you, all the countries letting it happen, everyone pretending like it's not there, everyone justifying the illegal occupations, you're all guilty. Right? But I'm a conspiracy theorist, right? As this all continues, as they obviously, and as the UN continues to say it's illegal. But because our government yells that it's not, I guess that just makes it okay. And as Spiro said in a recent thing he tweeted out, we are witnessing a destabilization operation. The same tactics we're seeing today have been used by the U.S. and the CIA to destabilize nations. And that's exactly what I keep saying. Americans are the ones under U.S. government sanctions right now. This is how all the other countries felt as our government attacked their peoples, claiming they were liberating them. This is how they felt. And I pray to God that we all realize that we all, especially the people that were thinking we were crazy, finally go, okay, I get it. You know, that we don't want military marching through the streets. We don't want people being told what to do. We don't want to be on quarantine or curfew, right? That's how they feel too. Now imagine that you had bombs dropping every 30 minutes. Now imagine you had planes and helicopters and trucks and tanks and everything flying everywhere and you couldn't do. Now imagine that. Now imagine how much more your life would be uncomfortable. Unbearable. And then, of course, your children are starving. And, you're fighting to not have them raped and abused by the soldiers that are passing by. These are the things that happened in Iraq, right? That is what they deal with. That's what we need to realize is beginning to happen here. And that's what they've always dealt with as they tell you they're liberating them. Just like they liberated Libya right into slavery. Like they liberated Iraq and Afghanistan into complete chaos. Like they liberated Bolivia into an authoritarian government, right? Liberation. After we've been shown that they lied then, they lied then, they lied then, they lied then. We proved it, right? Verifiably. Even in regard to the most recent in Bolivia, they proved it. MIT proved it. They manufactured the lie. Still happened. But he's still not in power. That needs to show you the reality. Even when we see them break the law and know that they're cheating and stealing and lying, they just laugh and keep going. So what we need to see is that the only thing we need to do is change them. And then go on to everything else. Until we can do that and do it together, we will never change anything. And I really hope we can see that today. So thank you so much for being here and hopefully taking some of this in. Another almost 3-hour show. I guess that's just what it's going to be lately. Again, I'm really just kind of giving up on trying to care about the timing. I'm going to continue to get the clips out for you. But, it's really just about getting the information out there. I can clearly see people grabbing these and making little videos and seeing them getting super views. And it's like, whatever, fine. I don't care. I really do not care about getting the most views or the most attention, as long as we can change this. I hope every single one of you take these and make videos on them and get them out there and get the spread. I hope so. That's what matters. So join me. I love you all. Truly, as always. Question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
يصنعوا فيروس وينشروه في العالم باش الشركات الرأسمالية تحصل أموال. الأمصال لا تباع، الدواء لا يباع. إذا كانت هي تباع بثمن غالي معناها تجارة. اعلنوا قولوا الدواء مجاني، الانصال المجانية، مش حتنتشر الفيروسات لأن خلقوا فيها باش يعملوا انصال وباش تكسب منها الشركات الرأسمالية. المصانع تشتغل بتاعت المخابرات.